your,
I will after that.
okay. Okay, it is, we'll call it 10 o'clock. If we could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Good morning. It's Wednesday, September 27th. It's 10 a.m. This is a workshop. The first item, which we did call to order, do we have any amendments to the agenda, Commissioners?
I have none.
None here, thank you.
Interim Director Hitt?
No, thank you,
Okay.
Commissioner.
So we'll proceed with the agenda as is. Agenda item 3 is the Flores Lake lands discussion, and I think probably most of the individuals here are for that workshop. We have broken down, was broken down in the agenda by our interim director, Hitt. This is his second, I believe, second meeting with us as a county administrator. The first portion of that was was a presentation by the Community Development Director, Carolyn Johnson, and the interim county administrator, John Hitt. The estimated time, and that's all it is, the estimated time, was 45 minutes, so I'll open it to John Hitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've asked Carolyn Johnson to actually do most of this presentation. And of course, you're welcome to, if any of you have questions as the presentation goes, any of the commissioners, you're welcome to ask your questions, or there's also opportunity once our presentation is over to ask questions and make comments in addition to that. But in case something comes up as the presentation is given, I don't want you to miss an opportunity to ask a question that may be timely as we give the presentation. I'm giving part of the presentation because as a portion of this, I actually had input on while I was South Coast Development Council interim director some months ago. So I will actually present a small portion of this overall presentation. Otherwise, the background, Carolyn Johnson held a meeting. Carolyn, when was that meeting?
April 27th.
In April in the Langley community to talk about, and she'll give you a little bit more background here in a minute, but talk about county-owned property that's located in that area. So with that, if with your permission, Mr. Chairman, I will ask Carolyn Johnson to begin.
Please do.
Okay, Carolyn?
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Before we get started, I'd like to talk just a little bit about the April 27th workshop. There were over 150 people there at the Langley Lions Club. Commissioner Boyce, you were there. The students from Pacific High School were engaged and helped out with that as facilitators and presenters at the workshop. I provided a presentation. Lots of folks talked. We had tables. Table leaders stood up and gave input from their different groups of 10 and 12, 15 people at tables. It was a very energized and I felt productive community meeting. Since that time, we've gone back with all of the information that was gathered from folks and created a presentation that I'll be sharing with you in this PowerPoint in a little bit. But some of the things, though...
Ms. Johnson, is everybody able to hear her okay? No, they're shaking their head no. So let's just take a second and make sure everybody can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
That's better.
Excellent.
That's
Okay.
better.
You don't have to start over.
Do I
but
need to
you
start
can.
over? No, okay. You all knew you were there, so we'll keep going. Anyway, where was I?
Thanks, Charles.
A lot of you, prior to the packet going out for this meeting, submitted letters. And for the record, that the board has received. As the letters began to come in, I was forwarding them, and I thought, I can't keep this up. There were too many. So those letters have all been included in the public record in the packet that the commissioners have. And just for posterity, I'm going to read out the folks who did submit letters. We heard from the Audubon Society, Ann, thank you. Mary Wall, Sylvia Ernst, Liz Brady, Kevin McHugh, Cheryl Canvasser, Christopher Johnson, Linda Tarr, Pete Wall, Shirley Wall, Hunter Graham, Sharon Jensen, Gary Graham, Pete Stephen, Bob Morrow, Mark Fuhrer, the Phillips family, Suzanne Gibbs, Michael Cribbs. Someone sent something in anonymously, but I took it anyway. Peg Reagan, Lee Kincaid, and Vicki Graham. Now, if I missed anybody, please let me know, and I'll make sure to get your letter to the board. We had 3 emails that came in after the deadline, and those came from Trudy Spanier, which that arrived this morning, and Dave Lacey and Deborah Boutron. So what I'd like to do is submit these for the record to the commissioners. I don't know that you all got them yet, but I want you to have them. There should be one for the commissioners, county council, and our clerk. So that being said, the letters and all the comments that we got from the meeting were great, and I don't want to go into as much detail and time as I did last time at the workshop, but what I'm going to present to you in this PowerPoint, which was also in your packet, and folks who were on the mailing list to receive emails, you should have gotten an email from me saying, here's the packet, you can look at it, and it included this PowerPoint. But what this PowerPoint includes is a little more information than what you heard at the workshop. We had not fleshed out some of the numbers. We had not identified some key issues that I think now we've kind of nailed down. The biggest one of those is related to Denmark Lane and access off of Denmark Lane, which I'll get into in a little bit. So that being said, I'm going to try to operate this, and I may ask for help, but please bear with me. Do I just click right? Left? Okay. It's not working
The
either.
mouse never works right.
That's right.
I just struggle.
Is it on? Yeah.
Just left click and it should work
Yeah, each click will get you to a new thing.
on the front left button.
This?
I think it's the mouse.
Oh, the front. I'm sorry. Okay.
That's why I'm the
The other
administrator.
front. That's why you're the administrator. Okay.
So you get the big bucks.
This is what we're looking at. Basically the southern Flores Lake County property. While there was some discussion about the northern Flores Lake property, I think the primary focus was on the southern portion. As you can see, there's state of Oregon parklands adjacent to that, Cape Blanco Airport, and county-owned property near that is, near the airport is some distance away. There is a coastal trail that comes up from around the airport through the state of Oregon parklands that is somewhat adjacent to this. There's a little bit of land between the two parcels. In this 500 acres, a lot of things we talked about at the workshop were the wetlands, the ag buffer, the natural area next door, the recreation potential, the coastal, coho, the fish population, wildlife, scenery, how valuable those are. This area is an amenity for current high-value tax-paying real estate on or near the lake. Lake and forests nearby, accessible only by watercraft and by foot. There is no vehicular access to this property. It also provides for wildlife and wetland habitat. Some of the issues and limitations is that there is a subdivision out there now with a lot of very small lots. It's not terribly practical to develop because they're too small for on-site septic and wells. A lot of these lots don't have any public access. A lot of them are within sensitive wetlands, and it's anticipated it would take a substantial amount of money to extend power and other utilities. This is a biggie. There's no vehicular access on Denmark Lane. Denmark Lane, the access is private. We researched the deeds. There's no public access easements over those, over that road. It's very narrow. Maybe some of you are here that live off of that road. Raise your hands. I would appreciate it. I think I might have talked to some of you, but maybe not. I'm not seeing the one lady that I did talk to. Because of the size, there's zoning and septic limitations would likely preclude development over these small lots. Trying to amend the code to require larger lots and combined, some of these might also be questionable due to some of the land use laws of the state that were incorporated into the county's zoning code. There's also potential septic installation challenges with the wetlands and the soil types in this area. When we get to the costs later, John will talk a little bit about the costs related to that. And I think that hits the last bullet. A lot of concerns that were brought up by the community. They're also identified in this packet. I'm going to segue away from this for a minute. There was a synopsis that staff put together of the comments and concerns raised by the community, but the community itself, there were probably 60 pages of notes generated that Teresa, I don't know if she's here, thank you, Teresa, she assembled those, scaled them down, and Mary Wall and Ann Vlisis took a look, and collaboratively they came up with a nice synopsis of all of those notes. Otherwise, this packet would be much bigger, so those are in here. But those notes reflected, besides a lot of other things that are in this PowerPoint, concern about residual chemicals by local cranberry growers during the rainy season. Water quality was a real concern, and how that would impact the lake and migratory birds, fishing, and water sports. And there was also a concern about a negative impact on the homes that are pretty high-paying property tax homes in this area. It was pointed out that if this is developed, there would be, and loss of forest would mean more gorse, more trails in the area, could increase potential for loss of natural habitat and vagrancy, homeless individuals. And another one was that Curry County has very limited resources to try to maintain this area were there to be either development or even passive recreation. Significant recreation and conservation and education potential was identified. Lot 400, closest to the ocean, it's got good potential access to State Park, and the remainder to the east, on all those tiny lots that you looked at, has potential for passive recreation use, as is. There's fishing, non-motorized watercraft, primitive camping, water trails, hiking, and would all be possible under the current physical conditions. Now, this doesn't take into account maintenance potential, but just under the physical conditions today, those would be possible. One idea that came up was a wildlife interpretive center for bird watching and the nature preserve, and nature preserve could enhance public awareness, education, and experience without significant change to the current conditions. I think you've all seen the small kiosk out at Blacklock. I don't want to speak for anybody, but I think something like that was brought up, only in a more expanded version, that would be a possibility. There was also a discussion of timber and land value potential. Right now, that's unknown what that would be. The concerns about it notwithstanding, we don't know what it would cost or what kind of money it could generate. It was pointed out that the lots with lakefront frontage could have financial potential. And if there was timber value, sales could potentially be managed for long-term return to the county with periodic parts. But there could be some environmental impacts. Now, when we began the workshop, one of the first things that was brought up is what we were all recognizing is that we have a great natural resource here. However, the county is seeking, some revenue source, and could that revenue source search be balanced with, the natural environment that's out there? And that's really, I think, the premise that we all walked in with was there was a recognition that there's a need for county revenue, but that has to be measured against the value of retaining the property as is or only minorly modified. There are development issues, analysis costs related to septic, transportation, utilities. I think that It's pretty clear vehicular access to get here would be costly, although we don't know exactly how much. We have an estimate that we'll talk about a little later. You know, private development, public development can come in many forms. Even a kiosk is development. So that's something that was talked about. Some potential negative environmental impacts could be destruction of habitat, light pollution, loss of birds and other wildlife, and threat to water quality. I talked about that a little earlier. I think, again, it was recognized that a variety of development types have different impacts. So that's something that the board will probably want to ask about. Options that were discussed, and this was a really big question, passive recreation or active recreation. Who should own it, the county or the state, the conservancy, like the Nature Conservancy, a combination, or others? If the county owned it, there would be a need to develop a park development plan, probably at a cost, and we're estimating $10,000 to $15,000. In that development plan, access points and development costs would have to be determined. There would need to be an identification of measuring that development plan against other county spending needs, other things the county has to spend money on. It's very well and good to put a plan together, but if there's not an implementation schedule and a commitment from the board on the outset that they're willing to pay for things, it can end up on a shelf, frankly. And I think that's an important point. We're estimating that an analysis estimate to get access from 101 to the eastern portion of the property would probably cost about $5,000. If there was an interest in Denmark Lane, we'd have to be talking to property owners about right-of-way dedication and costs. That's the total unknown, what that would take. Very rough estimate, in addition to what it would cost to get the acquisition of the right-of-way, would be the cost to construct a road along Denmark Lane. This is very rough, and I would anticipate this would not include environmental analysis or anything like that. So those were some very rough numbers that we came up with.
So who would have to pay this, the county?
I think that would have to be fleshed out if the board were to go with the idea of some kind of a trade with an agency or sale to an agency. That would all have to be part of the agreement. The same with a private party. If the idea was to develop part of this, you'd have the opportunity to say, you know, we'll work with you, but these would be the conditions. So a lot of that's fleshed out in a development agreement, whether it's a private agency, a public agency, or a developer. Yes?
Do you want questions now, or do you want to wait till the
I'll take
end?
questions anytime.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have a question?
No,
Oh, okay.
not now.
Related to conservation management, this was one of the options that we looked at, and I should have prefaced this before. We looked at development, conservation management, recreation, and timber. Yeah, so those were the four. So that's kind of the pattern here you're going to see in this PowerPoint. Whoops. The conservation management option included the idea of adding this to the state park's Flores Lake Natural Area, which if you remember on that map where that coastal trail is and where the state has their property, that could include a sale or a land swap with Oregon State Parks. Another option could include selling a conservation easement to the Nature Conservancy or some similar agency, or potentially an individual or a friends of group. The other thing that we don't have a lot of information on, but we could flesh out, was explore the possible sale of carbon credits if the forest land was left as it was, but we had an opportunity to sell the credits the carbon credits for that through their program. And I don't know a lot about that program, so I won't be able to answer too many questions. But
Have you investigated the land swap with the state parks at all yet?
I have talked to state parks, and I talked to the Nature Conservancy. In both cases, I framed it that we were examining this area and that I had not been authorized to do any kind of negotiation with them, but I just wanted to see what kind of interest they had. And they were interested in talking with us. The State Parks Department has identified for me some properties that they have in the county, and that ultimately, if that would be the direction the board would want to go out and really dig into this deeper, we could do that. The Nature Conservancy, my meeting with them went very well. They are very interested in seeing communities partner with the community itself. They really like the idea of a Friends of group that would work with them were we to want to negotiate with them. So,
Ms. Johnson, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think their background, sorry guys, they essentially try and pay for the property and take that route as opposed to condemning or, I mean, their reputation is really quite good.
Exactly.
And yeah, I really appreciate that you spent that time to contact them, and that was one of my first questions, and that's a good approach.
okay, thank you. Were there any other questions? No?
Let me just say something on the carbon credits. Where would you get those? How would you go about setting that up? Because it seems to me if you were to go that route, or we were to go that route, it would be a continuous stream of income. Yes? No?
Potentially, I think it would depend on whether or not you just included this property or other county property as well. And I don't know enough about it to answer that question absolutely correctly. I can,
Well, and who
Yeah,
knows
I
how
think-
long it'll last,
yeah.
too, so.
I think, John, did you have any comment about
Well,
that?
just, there are agencies setting up carbon sales and transfer programs. It's, to my knowledge, at least in a fairly incipient stage. So at this point, if that's the option the commissioners wish to, for us to explore, we would have to do a lot more research. There is actually, I was looking at some of the ORSs this morning in preparation for this meeting, and there actually is an ORS section dealing with the establishment of a carbon credits program for the state of Oregon. But what I don't know is how far along that is, whether they're in a position to even talk about how much they could pay or what kind of transfer, if it was some kind of transfer agreement, so that would all have to
So
be.
who would be paying?
Well,
is the
it's the idea,
State or-
yeah, potentially the state, in order to, keep that greenhouse gases encapsulated in those trees. Or also a credit transfer program would be somebody else that wanted to clear cut or do other activities that would release greenhouse gases, could offset that release of greenhouse gases by buying credits from someone that said, hey, we've got greenhouse gases trapped, in this case in trees. We'll keep it trapped there for a set period of time or maybe indefinitely in exchange for certain dollars. Something similar is done in Southern California with air pollution credits. So that's the basic concept.
Okay.
And Astoria is doing this. I received information from Mary Wall about it, and it was really helpful, but we definitely need to flesh it out. It is being done in places in the state. But the other interesting thing about that is that if and when the county established a county forest, we could also explore it for that purpose as well. So that's a hot topic for another day, but I'm just saying, sometimes you can do things for one project that has ramifications for other projects as well, and that could be one of those. So,
Do we have other properties that are considered forest or?
well, we'll be coming to you in about 2 weeks to talk to you
To talk
about
about
that, about vacant properties that we have that you've considered for sale, that, I don't want to give it all away.
Okay, well, we'll save that for another time.
Yeah, but,
The 40 acres Mac Arch, that's very similar property on the east side of the highway.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But anyway, with this option, some of the costs related to the initial cost related would be to do an appraisal of the land. You would want to have that in case, whether if you wanted to trade or sell, you want to know what it's worth beforehand. And that would take anywhere between $5,000 and $15,000. If you wanted to explore the option of potentially taking some of the timber or the carbon credits, you'd want to do a timber cruise. There was an estimated cost that John shared of about $1,500. Of course, then there'd need to be discussion, negotiations, agreement. That's all staff time that, you know, it's kind of hard to put a dollar value on that. So the $6,500 to $16,500 here is identified as the potential costs with this option. The forest management option, this idea would be to manage the land for maximum long-term sustained yield. Exploring this option and potential implementation would include a timber cruise that I just talked about, developing a forest management plan. The board's talked about doing this for a number of years, and that's another thing that's going to be on the list that we're going to talk to you about in a few weeks. That would probably run about $7,500 more, maybe. If that was the direction you went, we ultimately would have to contract with a forester to assure plan compliance and plan review. Looking at about $2,000 a year to make sure we're always staying on top of our plan and doing what we're supposed to do. And
So what's the potential income?
well, we don't know until we do the cruise.
Okay.
So it's a matter of, do you want to ultimately want to spend the money to find out? That just isn't, there's no way around that, so.
I'm going to be promoting to do the timber cruise as soon as possible. Spruce is up right now, and it's 80% spruce. I've been through there a couple of times. Not that I want to harvest it, but if we're going to be able to negotiate with anyone, I think along with appraisal, we're going to need that information, as you say, and very important. And the appraisal, I think we can get a fairly reliable one for under 5,000, I would think.
Well,
On
whatever.
both combined properties.
Sure.
Yeah.
Whatever direction the board decides to go, in giving direction to staff, John would be your lead negotiator with those entities. But we tried to just give you a ballpark for now. So, you know, going back to the idea of, did I skip ahead?
Oh, you did.
I did.
That's me.
Sorry. How do I go back?
Just go up to,
Now you got really big.
Oh, now I really messed it up.
Back to press on this little thing. If you can press on that little thing.
I don't know which little thing you're pointing at.
This little thing, yeah, right there.
This one?
Yeah, that mouse is
You got an
crazy.
unruly mouth.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, now I'm all messed up. Did we already go over this?
We did, yeah.
Okay, I'll keep going.
You're doing good.
Now we're into the recommendations, which is your part of the presentation. Let me try to go back again. Previous is what I want. Crumb. Hey, Charles, help me. This is what happens when I get distracted with questions. I love the questions, but I get a little distracted. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
So you can right click. Previous. Oh,
It's a good thing we got a
Okay.
techie here.
We were
Is that what
before
you
the
want?
options.
is that what you
No, go one more.
One more.
I think.
I think we were talking about the forest management. Yeah,
Yeah.
go forward.
Right there?
No,
One
One more back.
one
One
more
more
back.
back.
There it is.
Yep.
And then the last item on here would be for the board, if you wanted fully to go with a forest management program, to set up the community forest program that I talked about a little bit ago. The board's been talking about this for a couple of years. Along with the management plan, we're estimating a cost of about $15,000 to do that. The total initial cost and staff time would be about $26,000 if you went purely with this option. And the subsequent annual costs we're estimating at $2,000 a year. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to get this plan done in 1 year, because that kind of thing, you have a lot of public input, we have meetings, and sometimes that's a multi-year process, so. I think we're at a point where John's going to take over on the presentation. Is that right? Okay. Do you want this?
Use your mic, yeah.
Sure, it's on, and you know which left, front.
Left front, yes. At least I hope I can get that right. As I mentioned in the introduction, this remaining part, I had some input on as when I was with the South Coast Development Council. So we talk about options here, and these are just options. And subsequent slide, we'll talk about recommendations. It's just a menu of recommendations. I want to make clear at this point, staff has no particular recommendation to make to the commissioners. Obviously, depending on your discussion today, public input and so on, we would set a future meeting at your pleasure to bring back specific recommendations to you, again, dependent on your discussion, in part on your discussion today. So what would it be, what would be some of the costs, some of the potential benefit of considering some development? And again, these are just various options, various recommendation choices, menu of choices. Obviously, septic is a question. If you were going to have any type of residential or commercial tourism-related development. So my estimate that I got, general septic feasibility, $7,500. And that's not doing a lot of test pits. That's just picking out particular portions of the property that look like they would be based on the soil mapping and doing a check that way. We have lots of small lots, I guess originally created, tiny lots, I should say, particularly for a rural area that were created back, I guess sometime around the World War I era. Those probably all would need to be extinguished. Basically the entire property, including lot 400 or parcel 400, replatted. And the suggestion here is probably in 1 to 3 acre parcels in those areas adjoining or very close to the lakefront. So roughly 20 to 40 parcels could be created, maybe a bit more than that. And then that would really depend on what's next, and that's establish development potential for lakefront lots, including appraisal with hired development management firm to do conceptual development plan, approximately $12,000. So the septic feasibility would be in addition to that. So we're probably roughly $20,000 for development consultant to go in there, take a look, and say, is this really practical, feasible? What are some of the costs if we were to do open these lakefront properties for residential development or tourism-related development, or perhaps some combination of the two? As Carolyn mentioned, obviously, no matter what you do there, if you do anything, access is a big question. So the estimated cost I got to if Denmark Lane could be, we don't know at this point if it even could be, but if it could be expanded to allow a public access, not counting right-of-way acquisition, $650,000 or maybe a bit more. And then, as I mentioned, all these tiny lots, particularly, again, those closest to the lake, existing tiny lots would have to be extinguished. Lot 400 will also have to be platted out. Estimated cost of that, $35,000. Now, much of that would be staff time devoted to that. So initial total cost and staff time, $54,000, $54,500. Extended cost for access, again, we don't really know that at this point. So recommendations, again, just a menu of recommendations. So one would be that Commissioner Boyce already mentioned, obtain a timber cruise, timber value estimate, $1,500, formal appraisal. Hopefully we can get that done for $5,000 or less. contact or communicate with land conservatories and similar organizations regarding a possible conservation easement potential and what income could be obtained as a result of that, if any. Identify funding for preparation of a master plan for the area. Again, if you want to look at the development potential, and then also explore a possible sale of carbon credits in a county forest and recreation land management plan or program. Staff time, again, estimated about $7,500. Additional menu of recommendations. Again, one of the key questions is if you want to consider this area for recreation, is it passive, is it active? And then if you do either one of those, some kind of park development plan, park planning would have to be done. Again, even if it's a low intensity passive development, if we're going to plan for anything more than what's there already, we should do that in a proactive and a well thought out way. So we need some kind of park development plan. Including staff time, I think we were probably a little high on this estimate, 10 to 15,000, but we'd probably be looking at, as a bare bones minimum, probably 5,000, and that would be if it was more of a passive park orientation rather than an active park. Certainly another option, contact Oregon State Parks for possible land swap. As Carolyn mentioned, we've already preliminarily done that. However, if your direction is to pursue that more completely and more aggressively, we can certainly do that. We don't know what the time frame to that would be, no cost other than staff time. Don't know. I had a conversation with the regional Oregon State Parks director. He seemed to indicate a level of interest, as Carolyn reported. However, he was not sure as to a time frame. We could be out many months, could be out several years before any land swap could be implemented. And that's assuming everybody was agreeing. Explore potential for establishment of a private party or group to take some or all of the property for public use and management, get more of a staff time. And if active recreation would be explored, approximately $5,000. For active recreation, we have to have that access from 101. So we don't know what that would look like. Is it Denmark Lane? Is it someplace else? So civil engineer that I happen to know pretty well does excellent work, gave me an estimate for $5,000 to do that. So all of these, if you were to advise staff, direct staff to do all of these, and you wouldn't necessarily do that, but if you did, 18.5 to 24.5. Other possible things to consider or recommendations to consider. Formulate a conceptual development plan for Lot 400. That was that large, currently unplatted parcel of land at the southwest corner of the lake or section of the lake. So if you were to direct staff to pursue that, all other areas be restricted to public open space easements dedicated to the county or another agency like state parks. Some public access along the lake might be included with that. And the concept plan, again, would have to include vehicular access and what that might cost, what that might look like. Again, conceptual development plan, about $12,000. So septic feasibility would have to go with that, another $17,500. And the access question, another $5,000. So $19,500, $20,000 or more, maybe up to $25,000 if we were to pursue all those menu of recommendations. And I believe that's it. And we have Mr. Chairman on your agenda next. Any questions that you as commissioners may have for myself or Carolyn? Where's Carolyn? Where'd she go?
Right behind you.
Oh, right behind me. I'll let you be the first person to deal with the questions, and I'll be your backup. Or sometimes we can do vice versa. I'll give you the mic back.
Thank you.
I think what we'll do then, try and flip-flop back and forth. We'll start, with Commissioner Gold for questions.
Okay.
Okay, my question, well, kind of double-edged. Did we acquire all of these parcels because of non-payment of taxes originally, or how did we get them? That's the first part of the question. The second part is, if we were to do a land swap, how is that going to affect I know if we were to sell the property, we would have to pay out the taxes based on all of the special districts. The county would not get a huge amount. So if we were to trade it, how would that affect the county?
Okay, let me try these one at a time. How did we acquire the property? I couldn't tell you. I don't know. But
Okay.
it's been in county ownership for some time.
Because that would make a difference in how we
It would.
approach it, I would think.
But the other point that I think is important is that, yes, we own the bulk of that property, but there are some parcels that are privately owned, interspersed in that huge piece. So that would be something we would have to deal with as well. So the potential, if we were to try to sell it, we would have to deal with those few folks inside that area that do own property. So the land swapped, I mean, I think this goes back to finding out what the value of the property is. You know, we would want a similar value somewhere else. Might not be as big, might be a totally different kind of environment, but it would be something that we'd have to be able to use or, you know,
Well, it would have to
benefit
be of
from.
like value, I would think.
Correct.
Close.
So again, the appraisal would be important on that. As far as paying the taxes and the payout, you know, we keep bringing up this community forest idea. And it's our understanding at this point is, and we need to do more work on it, but were the county to sell the property, there would be a different payout than there would be if we were to have a community forest and it was part of the forest and we sold it that way. And John, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, just a little bit more, and this will come back to your workshop in 2 weeks. And of course, I would like to get more input from County Council John Huddle on this. But right now, the ORS, Oregon Revised Statutes, talks about 2 different options, and I'm not sure yet exactly how they meld or work together. One is establishment, the county could establish what's called a community forest under ORS 530, and I think it's I'm not sure of this, or a county forest under ORS section 275.3. Both of those would provide more options to the county. Neither one means anything's going to happen right away. We would have to do the forest management plan, but would allow, again, options of selling conservation easements, options of perhaps harvesting portions of timber over the years. Again, lots of other options with either one of those 2 programs or agencies, plans that are outlined in the ORS, so that the issue of how the land was acquired becomes less important and less significant.
So the monies gained from management of the forest or whatever would come directly back to the
That's
county
correct.
without having to
Yeah,
spread
that's-
them over all the tax districts?
In a
Okay.
broad brush nutshell, yes.
Okay.
And if I could point out too, this is one of those programs that could apply not just here, but I think I mentioned before, if the county owns other properties in other
That's
parts
true.
of the county that we want to do the same thing, we would have a program in place. This is just one location where that could be utilized.
And I should add too, the ORS makes clear that whether it's a community forest or a county forest program or some combination of the 2, the lands do not have to be contiguous. They could be spread.
I was going to ask
Yeah.
that question next. Okay.
And the other interesting thing, and I think Douglas County is doing this, I need to confer with them a little more, is that they also include basic recreational lands, not just forest land. There's a provision there for that as well.
That's correct.
So, you know, that might be a nice revenue discussion to have in a few weeks, so.
Commissioner Gold, did you have any other
Not right now.
questions? Okay, then, to Commissioner Boyce.
Thank you. Just read Ms. Banier's letter and a couple of very good points too, if I may, specifically. Now that we've lost 200,000 acres of prime, 1/5 of Curry County, it puts a little different outlook on this. I mean, nobody, to just set everybody at ease, I don't know anybody that wants to go in there and harvest the timber or make a horrific mistake, but especially after what we're going through in Brookings right now in South County. So, yeah, forgive the family history, but my grandparents in Langlois raised 12 kids by logging, ranching, farming, primarily logging. But to walk through there the second time, they would have been shocked to do anything with that other than try and put it into parks or access for the public in a very, very sensitive way. I do have a little bit of concern with the discussion on the state parks. The property they have available matching, as you said, Mr. Hitt, value to value. So I'm glad to hear, and I think several of our constituents have mentioned the need for an appraisal, and I think that's obvious. And I hope we can appropriate that money and pursue that fairly quickly to make your job easier. Excellent presentation, by the way. We're not hearing from anybody in South County, so I know that's going to be an issue at some point because it is a county-owned property. So we almost need to consider a PR approach to letting them know what the North County folks are looking at and what their philosophy is on how this should be managed. And the approach you're taking with the April meeting, I think, was a very good start. And I would love to have this board be the board within the last 10 years that actually gets this completed in a way that is pretty well accepted within the public and something we can be proud of. And again, 500 or 700 acres with what we just lost, it does put a new outlook on it, and I appreciate that. By the way, though, in the times I've been there, I haven't seen any bear or cougar. I haven't seen very many deer either, so I don't know how accurate that is, but it is a tremendous wildlife habitat, probably minus the four-legged creatures. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think your point about a discussion with state parks is a good one, and I think that if the board directs us to begin that type of discussion and looking something like for like, I think there's a number of ways that we could flesh that out. Remember, this is a huge area, and it doesn't mean that the whole thing would need to be swapped out. One of the nice things about all those little lots that are platted is that you have some very clear dividing lines of property. So if the county were to want to go with just, part of the property for a trade and part of the property retained in the county or the Nature Conservancy or another individual, part in a county forest, part not, I think there's some options here that we could look at. I don't think it's all or nothing here because it's so big, so.
We might possibly want to consider conditional for the state if we had some momentum there that they might want to add the development of it for some of the ideas that you've had here, some of the ways to make it easier for the public to have access. And I think there is too possibly some lottery money that would be available. I can't say for sure, of course, but that might even possibly speed up the process. And that money might also be available for helping us to fund some of the direction that you're recommending here. And maybe you've already looked into that.
Yeah, somewhat. And I was fortunate enough to get some information from some of the folks that live in the area. I know Ann Velisis provided some information about some potential grant funding, and then I found another source. So, there is some potential to flesh some of this out. I think the question is going to be, how long do you want to wait for grant money? How long, then you got to manage it, and then you got to come up with a product. I think some of the things that we're talking about, it would work for that kind of a model. But some of the smaller things, like getting an appraisal, getting a timber cruise, that'd be up to the board, but waiting for grant money for something like that might not really be worth it. If you want to keep the momentum going, I guess that would depend.
Understand.
And as far as the rest of the county participating, one of the reasons this meeting is here is because we wanted the rest of the county to come. We did have folks come from Gold Beach, and a couple folks came from Brookings to the big workshop. So we really did try to advertise it countywide. But yeah, I'm all about trying to get out ahead of this type of meeting with community workshops. I think that this was a good example of how that could work, because folks are coming here fairly informed because they participated and they had as much time as they wanted to talk. But now it's your turn, but they'll have a little time too. anyway. Did you have
Did
any?
you have any?
That's all I have. Thank you for now, Mr. Chairman.
Just ever so briefly, and because I'm certainly interested in the presentation and then the comments, which I think are going to be pretty typical, as far as the opinions. But as I understood a couple of years ago when I talked to the county assessor, this started, as I think it was mentioned, close to 100 years ago. And there was supposed to be a grand plan, as it was explained to me. It didn't work. The lots were small. They drew in roads, but when they looked at developing and actually cutting into the roads, it was going to result in, I understood, draining of the lake or something like that. There were many over the decades, many decades. There were repossessions. They tried at some point or multiple times to still buy out some of those real scattered owners that kept them. Most people just stopped, as it was explained to me, stopped paying the taxes and they were repossessed. The assessor, I distinctly remember, showed me a file cabinet. There was somewhere between 1.5 and 2 feet deep of paper stacked, in a file cabinet. And he said that was over the 20 plus years that he'd been in here, and that it had been brought up and looked at, and then filed and brought up and looked at, and more paper filed, and 3 or 4 or more times. So I think, to Commissioner Boyce's, I would hope that ultimately something can be finalized in these discussions and interfacing with certainly the residents. It's primarily the North County, and people clearly are very engaged. And so I'd just be interested to hear again from the presentation from Ann and then the comments and see where we go from there.
Okay, thank you. I think that's about all I have at this point, and John and I will be available to engage with you after the presentations.
Okay, so with that, okay, then Van will turn the presentation over to you.
Let's see if we might need to figure out.
Should be a button you can.
Oh, sure, it's already going, but I need to go back to the beginning. Whoops.
I think,
Okay.
oh, really?
But we need to get back to the beginning. Charlie? Whoops, I'm giving away my thing here. Can I get it? Oh, there we go. Okay. So we can't hear me from behind, so maybe I will try to hold this. Is that better? Can you guys hear me now? Okay. So good morning, everybody. My name is Ann Velisis, and I really appreciate the opportunity to give you a presentation. I'm the president of the Kalmiopsis Audubon Society, which has about 350 members from throughout Curry County who've been paying attention to this issue for a long time. I first got engaged in it about 12 years ago, owing to concern about a proposed county development up there and how it would affect wildlife. And since then, the county's gone through many different proposals, and over time, I've learned a lot about the land, the issues, the many values at stake. I've met a lot of people in the north part of the county and throughout the whole county who know about this area and who care deeply about Flores Lake. So I just want to say this morning, I'm going to be aiming to make a presentation from a broader perspective of representing the community as best I can, even though there's lots of diverse people. I think we have a lot of unity of opinion on this, so just want to tell you that. In particular, I want to emphasize, tell you why many citizens think the conservation recreation option is the best one for you to pursue, the best direction, and in particular, why the land swap with Oregon State Parks could really have the best shot of meeting 3 important aims. One is generating revenue for the county, of course, also safeguarding critical public values that underlay our tourism and recreation economy for the long term, and finally, to have broad public support. So that's what I'm going to be hoping to do today. First of all, I'm going to say we've had a great presentation that Carolyn and John have given us, so forgive me for parts that are repetitive, but hopefully it will be actually helpful to come back and revisit these things as you guys are thinking about what to do.
First off, I think it's incredibly important for you to understand the physical characteristics of the land that we're talking about, the constraints and values of them. And I appreciate that some of you, I think, have gotten out to look at the lands and know them firsthand. But I want to, as you see, the state park is the purple nearby, or the state natural area state parks lands. And here you can see, oops, it got a little bit too big, but you can see how the county parcels fit on the larger landscape. Even though the parcels have lake frontage, based on local knowledge and people going out there, citizens have brought up many constraints to development in this area. So that's what I'm going to go over quickly. Again, as we heard, no public road access. And the property owners on Denmark Lane, I've had some of them talk to me and tell me that they don't have an interest in sharing their private roads for public access. That's something that I know you guys have to explore more, but that's a big thing. Also, we heard the cost of building a road into this area this morning for the first time, that rough estimate of $650,000 without cost of developing the easement, tracking it down, all that kind of stuff. So I just want to understand that this matter of access is a really big and very fundamental constraint. There's all these ideas, but it's a very big and fundamental constraint. I've also heard, I haven't investigated this, that the property owners south of the land, the farms, cranberry farmers, are also not interested in permitting public access through their private roads. So we've also heard that because of historic platting, the lot sizes are too small. There's complexities, there's inholdings, and there's complexities in figuring our way out of that. There's wetlands that finger through the property that will make it difficult to access and to develop roads. Here's what some of them look like. This is what some of the lakefront looks like. It's actually quite interesting and beautiful. Here's some of the forested wetland. These pictures are taken in the summer, but I've been told in the winter that there's a lot of standing water in all these places. Deep, yes, certainly in the state park, they're deep. I know that, or the state for natural area. Related to the tiny lots and the underlying soil, we've heard that there's very likely poor septic feasibility out there. There haven't been individual tests, but people who have property in this vicinity who have tried to develop have come up against this problem, and so that's one of the ways we're aware of that general problem. And we heard that it is costly to figure it out. We got the estimate, $7,500 for a general estimation, but to go in there and really figure it out requires site-specific evaluation. So, of course, all of these constraints point to extremely high costs of development for this land and difficulties. And finally, there's this matter of the revenue sharing. If the land is sold, that has been brought up, that is a problem that needs to be figured out if you are to pursue development with a private entity. Next, I want to talk about what we have in terms of timber out there. So we have some harvestable trees, but I think they have likely marginal value in terms of providing revenue for the county. I'm going to go, I'm saying this because the County Natural Resources Committee went out there in 2010. That was a committee made up of several forestry professionals in our community. Of course, this is the Curry County way that we've been doing things through the years, lots of volunteer input, drawing on expertise of our communities, which I think is a really cool thing. They went out there and found that while there might be some value that could be had if the land was clear cut, that would, of course, have environmental challenges. There would be impacts to other values. They also looked at long-term timber management, but found that there would be, of course, lots of cost up front to do that timber management. I've also had neighbors in that area next to the property tell me that they found the same thing when they tried to investigate timber management for their own forest land. So, of course, to get a definitive answer, you would need to get the timber crews. That might cost more than $1,500, I've been told by some people, for that amount of area, but Meanwhile, citizens have pointed out some important limits. Again, there's no road access into there, so to do forest management, you need to be able to get roads get in there to do it. It's difficult terrain, and especially, again, there's wetlands, there's streams that cross the area, so there'd be, to build roads, to build bridges, all of those things have to be recognized. There's also a high potential for gorse infestation in this area, and that's something that people in the North County know a lot about, and we know that one of the best ways to control gorse is to shade it out. And the opposite of that is true too. So when you open up an area and disturb it, you create the opportunity for gorse seeds to get in, take over, and thrive. And that's especially the case right there because the airport is actually one of the main sources of gorse seed, unfortunately, for that region. So to address that, forest managers would probably have to use a lot of herbicides. That would be something people, I'm sure, would be unhappy about or would have high concerns about in the lake watershed. There's also, finally, the problem that's been identified of wind throw, which is if you were to try to do forest management and do thinning out there, in forests that are so close to the ocean, there is just a much higher likelihood that if you take a lot of trees out, that the trees that are left standing, get blown down by the wind. So it's just another thing.
Or they end up with no limbs on the north side.
Yeah, so that's another thing that's been brought up. And the forest out there has been called kind of scraggly, especially the parts that are close to the lake, close to there. So that's just that's our perspective. That's kind of some community input on how that looks. So whoops, uh-oh, I did the wrong thing here. How do I do that? Go back. So again, whoops. Given the high costs for all of this stuff, given these difficulties and ongoing management, it doesn't look like there's a pot of gold here either. There we go. Okay. At the same time, of course, we know that these lands have extremely high amenity values, I will call them, because they form the scenic backdrop to Flores Lake. This is the beautiful view that you get if you walk out from the county, Boyce Cope Park, you walk across a little bridge out to the beach, and you look back, and these are the county lands that you see across the lake. This is the only place for beach access for the community of Langlois, and so a lot of people go out there. This is a very important place for people in that community, and so you can see why they're concerned about what is going to happen here. So it's this amenity value, this beautiful scene that we see is very important. It's also important to people who own property and own houses on the lake. This beautiful view is part of what makes their properties valuable. And as has been pointed out, these are properties that have higher values and pay higher taxes. So that is in some ways an economic value of this view that we are already getting. Perhaps most important is the high recreation values of this area, and I want to just go through that a little bit. The county lands form the scenic backdrop for all of the lake's water and wind-based recreation. And you probably know, or if you don't, Flores Lake is actually a renowned destination for windsurfing and kiteboarding. People come from all over the country and world to do these sports here. It's known as a place where people can come and learn and practice because the lake has gentle water, so people come back again and again and fall in love with this area. People also come to this area to sea kayak and fish. Here's some of the scenes from that. The county park and campground, this is Boyce Cope Campground. So when people come to do these wonderful sports, a lot of people stay in the campground, and as do other people passing through. And last year, we find this campground, I've heard, is almost always full in the summer. People get turned away from it often. And last year, the county parks director, Jay Trost, reported that this campground actually produces a really impressive stream of revenue. So it's a pretty neat asset that the county has already. The county park, here's the day use area with some bicyclists enjoying the view there across the lake, is also the one primary gateway to Flores Lake Natural Area, which of course is that state park area that hosts the Oregon Coast Trail, which is a tremendous asset and value that we have down here in the South Coast. It has stunning views and really interesting trails for people. It tends to attract people who like longer, more rugged, and remote hiking. So the county property, which is right next door to that, has natural potential to build on those recreational values for trails, for hiking, bird watching, and fishing. Finally, I just want to underscore that these recreation tourists really do matter for the economy of the North County. They help to support lots of the small businesses that we have there that cater to them, restaurants, shops, and new coffee shop, B&Bs, that kind of thing in Langlois and in Port Orford. And these recreation amenities also draw many people to buy houses and become our new residents, people who really love the area as much as the rest of us do. Finally, just quickly, I want to go over the conservation values. Those lobes of the lake that go into the county's land are important wintering habitat for winter waterfowl. In the winter, you can see thousands of ducks out there, gulls, and these graceful swans. We've got year-round habitat for osprey and bald eagles. There are bear out there, Commissioner Boyce. I didn't have a picture. I only had a picture of bear scat, but I didn't want to bring that because I didn't want to offend anybody.
I was looking so I could verify and help you, but I couldn't find it.
Anyway, but that's true. Anyway, we've also got, it's also important habitat for coastal coho, which is a threatened fish species. The Flores Lake, these coastal coho and Flores Lake are particularly important because they have such great rearing habitat. The fish actually spawn in the tributary streams that flow through the county property, and they come down and they overwinter in the lake, so they're particularly robust. It's a really good and important run that we have there. And we also possibly have a beautiful flower that's called the Western Lily. It's an endangered flower that only grows in the terraces really close to the coast. We have not confirmed that. They exist in the state natural area nearby, but that's kind of a potentially interesting and neat thing. So, and finally, as has been pointed out, all these county lands buffer the lake from agriculture, so it's really important for the water quality of the lake. That's something that we take for granted, but it is a value, an ecosystem service, if you'd like, that we should value and pay attention to. Okay. So now that I've gone over, reviewed all these, the basic configurations, the constraints, and the values, we need to step back and take a longer view. And I want to go over the background of county actions. These have been alluded to, but this is really another important set of information for you guys to know. And I'm going to just go through them as you plan to make a decision here or work on this. I'm just going to go through this briefly, but make some important points at the end. Okay, in 2005, we had a county commissioner who secretly advanced a plan to develop this area. And when it came out into the open, it was, there was major public opposition and the plan died. In 2010, the county appointed a natural resources committee to inventory the lands. As I described earlier, they found marginal value of the timber, the plant, there was no action. In 2011 and 12, we had a different commissioner who advanced a plan for a golf course on these and adjacent state park lands. Again, much of this was in secret, and this time there was a massive outpouring of opposition, and I mean massive, and that proposal died. In 2015 and 16, the county appointed a real property task force to, again, inventory the lands and this time make a recommendation about what to do with them. The task force recommended that the board consider a land swap with state parks, and there was no action. Instead, in 2016, a county staffer advanced a plan to swap the 500 acres with a developer who had plans for a golf course. There was major opposition, and it died. So the 3 points I want to emphasize here is that there's already been a tremendous amount of work on this through the years by previous county commissioners, previous county staff, lots of citizen committees, citizen involvement, a lot of meetings. There's been a lot of field trips, stones turned, and information garnered on these lands. There's also been a lot of missteps, advancing of kind of sky in the pie proposals of these public lands in secret, without sufficient information, without sufficient public input, which has led to tremendous distrust, opposition, and repeated failures. So if you take the long view, you can see that the county has been spinning its wheels. And last, the public has repeatedly opposed development for these special lands and advocated and asked for a conservation recreation solution instead. Which brings me to the county's Community Development Department workshop in April, which Carolyn mentioned. I really want to thank this board for finally being the board to direct your staff to engage the public directly and to really put some time and effort into thoroughly investigating and researching these issues. This workshop, as we said, we had 150 people. This picture was taken, we forgot to get a picture when everybody was there. This was taken at the beginning. But there was a wide range of people there. If you knew the community, you knew there were old timers and newcomers. There were ranchers and farmers and recent retirees and windsurfers. It was really quite an amazing swath of community. And as Carolyn said, there were people from elsewhere in the county that came up. And Commissioner Boyce, we appreciate that you were able to attend on behalf of the whole commission. The groups were at tables. We thoughtfully weighed these 4 options, and when the factors that I've explained to you were brought up again and discussed, this matter of poor development and timber values and the high amenity recreation and conservation values, there was clear and overwhelming support for a conservation recreation option. So this time, your staff has prepared a more thorough evaluation of alternatives than any board has ever considered. They've created a menu of options and potential actions for each. At this point, all the options require more research, more county funds, and more effort. And so at this juncture, I think it's very important for you to think practically about what can actually succeed out there before more time, more money, and more effort are thrown at this problem. It's been a sticky widget, as they say, I guess. And for all the reasons I've put forth, we strongly hope that you choose the direction of conservation recreation. And I want to end this presentation by focusing on that option that many of us favor and feel has the best chance for success in resolving what we should do with these lands, which is the land swap with state parks. We feel that this has the potential to be an efficient path to generating revenue because it could provide the county with a different piece of land that has access and that doesn't have all these constraints. There's more information that's come out this morning about some of that, but I still think this gives us a clear path to follow. The option would have relatively lower costs compared to some of the options and could use staff time and could collaborate with state park staff time as well. A land swap would avoid the revenue sharing problem that was brought up earlier. It would provide and contribute to long-term economic benefit by building on the recreation values that we already have and dovetailing with initiatives that are happening now in our county that have to do with the developing a more robust recreation economy. It would follow the recommendation of the task force. It would enjoy broad community support. And finally, it would avoid us going through this cycle of repeating again and going back and having pitfalls of the past. However, in order to consider this option, it's my understanding that we really need to have the board give the go-ahead. I've had conversations with some people in state parks. Of course, they can't really talk to me. They have to talk to official people. And they've said, we can't really have this conversation until the Curry County Board of Commissioners says, yeah, we really want to have this conversation. I am aware that there may be options for properties, and maybe it's not just state park properties, maybe it's state properties. But before you can have a serious discussion about that, there needs to be the go-ahead and direction from you guys. So we hope that as you consider all your options, you will consider this one and go ahead and pursue it, or ask your staff to pursue it further. So to conclude, I just want to come back to this beautiful view across the lake and to emphasize that Flores Lake really is one of the gems of our South County. It's something that, as you know, because there's been so much involvement, a lot of people really feel strongly about, and in very personal ways. And as you move forward, I hope you will choose a direction that really will recognize those important values that people cherish. And we also, again, applaud you for wanting to find a solution, and we hope that this can be the board that will make something positive come of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ann.
And I would just say, I think there's time for me to ask, if you have questions, I'd be happy to ask them. And I know there's many people here who represent lots of different opinions too that would love to, I'm sure, put in their 2 cents, or different people.
So we'll continue, going in the same order here then. Do you have any questions, Commissioner
I was
Bolt?
just going to say, I would like whatever decision we make to be a win-win for everybody. Win for the county, win for the people up in North County.
Great, thank you.
Did you have any other?
No.
Commissioner Boyce?
Thank you. You mentioned gorse, and the 2 times I've been in there, I was like, hold your breath, because in case you find some. And I can't form any conclusions, but very happy to report, and I'm sure you're aware of this, no gorse in there, and that is a gigantic.
Well, I actually have
Oh, I'm sorry I didn't find it. I would have brought my shovel for sure.
I was going to say,
You climb up those fingers where the marginal edges have been cleared due to natural phenomena. There is gorse already kicking in. It's a shade.
The public has made that effort? Okay, so you carry your shovel, and it is something that we, for North County, as you said, in fact, in the Brookings fire, people were almost kind of hoping that the gorse would have been involved a little bit around even the residential areas. That's not the case, but for just making the long-term case that was part of this 200,000 acres that we just lost. But in North County, any way that we can be aware of that and public involvement. And so you make a very good point there on the shade that.
I've seen some gorse out there. I've only seen a little bit, and what I saw, in fact, and that's what informs my thought about that, was a kind of gorse plant about to die because it was under a forest. And I just thought, yeah, okay, can't let that go, can't go backward on that. Anyway.
Is this report? It's excellent, of course, and much appreciated. Is this available for our record?
What
here?
I would like to do is, I was working on it till late last night, so I'd like to, maybe later today, Carolyn, may I submit these things that I did for the record of this?
Certainly no hurry, but other people within the county that that are contacting our office here would be, subject to your approval, would be wonderful to be able to have that accessible to
Yes,
them.
absolutely, Commissioner
Okay.
Boyce. Thank you. Any other further
I
questions?
think that's okay. I think, question for the county administrator, but when that does go on, we could also put that on the website, on the page for this workshop, so that anyone interested could go there and download the document. Did you have a comment?
Well, help me, and by the way, Ann, thank you. I know you put in a lot of work, and I appreciate your coming and presenting what you did. And also want to thank, and I neglected to do that when I started my presentation, for everybody coming here today and taking your time. But I guess one of the things I've kind of struggled with, and so help me here, I know the strong, or at least a strong recommendation from most of the residents in the area is to do, as you concluded with, the swap with Oregon State Parks. So I guess what I'm struggling with, let's say, and I'm not supposing anything from the county commissioners, but let's say the county commissioners were to decide we want to make a park there. How would you see that different if the county said we want to do a park there and develop a park master plan, public input, public hearings, the normal steps that are routinely followed in developing a park plan, versus Oregon State Parks owning it? Help me out there.
I guess what I would say to that, and I'm just going to speak for myself, but I think I'll do my best to represent people, is that there's been so much distrust with the county over this issue that I think people would be really afraid that we do that. It might sit on a shelf, and then the next time there's a county commissioner, a new county commissioner, they'd say, oh, there's still that land up there. Let's go and see if we can make $10 million. There's sort of this concept that there's something up there to be that nobody else has ever been able to figure out, and that it's a lot of money. And I think that's a false concept. And so I think that's one of the reasons I think people would maybe look at that less favorably, but perhaps that could be a good solution if that could be recognized. For example, if there were conservation easements as part of it, so that we know we wouldn't be looking at a development proposal again in another 3 years or 4 years or however long.
Thank you.
Did you have any?
That's all hidden, Mr. Chair.
I also just emphasize one thing I want to come back to, because we looked at all these options, is this matter of road access. It really seems like that's a pivotal thing to work out before people, I think, don't own. Of course, we all care about that place, so that's a primary motivation for a lot of people to be here. But I think we've all also would like the county to not go through cycles again and again as taxpayers and as people who have observed this. So just would make that a point too.
Commissioner Boyce?
So the golf course I've been working on probably isn't going to go over.
It's not going to fly.
Secret golf course? Yeah, secret.
Secret. We want it
We're
secret.
gonna come after you with tar and feathers. No.
Well, I received about 17 letters, which I very much appreciated, and they weren't form letters, which, of course, give them all additional credibility, which I appreciated. You know, I want to, maybe now's not the best time, but I just want to remind the exposed areas we have in rural parts of our county through the law enforcement concerns that we all have. And a lot of times it's people coming across the county border, middle of the night, they stake out some of the part-time homeowners, and they can just go in at will. And that seems to have subsided a little bit lately, but it is a huge concern of mine. And when you look at what's going on in Coos County, Josephine County, and certainly Del Norte County, it's a little sleepy here right now. And I think we all have a responsibility to try and do our best to keep it that way. And that's going to take some planning as well. So I just want to really be real about the exposure I think we have, a concern that I think many citizens share, not to overstate it, but it is something that we want to get as many deputies in that area and in Harbor as we possibly can.
That's a great point, Commissioner Boyce, and that's one I've heard that people have about developing that area, bringing more people into that area if we don't have law enforcement up there to back it. That is an opinion that people have in the North County. That I had to abbreviate points, but that is something, so I'm glad you brought that up.
And in schools too, it's all the services that we need to provide. Are we going to just take the next 40 minutes, Mr. Chair, and have this discussion? I know you have a couple public
Well, no, I
comment.
think the next thing here was going to be public comments to follow the agenda, and not until Ann's finished with that.
You'll be available anyway.
Yes,
Okay, thank
I can be
you.
available to answer questions.
I think then if we go into it, just let me make a few comments to the public comments based on, we had, and this would, is a request, it's not a demand, or this is the way it's going to be. We had 10 public comment cards, and what I would ask, and they're in the order that they were received, so we have one through 10. I'd be happy to, we tried to limit it to 15 minutes or 2 minutes per comment, but I would ask certainly that based on what Ann Lacey's had just gone through, or ask the people that want to speak, if that's basically your position, you could let us know, and, we come up very quickly and comment. If it's different, we certainly, would want to hear from you. So that said, the first individual to submit the card was Lucy Labonte. So I would ask, with anyone, if you say, no, I'll pass because I feel exactly that way, then we'll note that on the slip. Okay, you have the floor. Good morning.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Lucy Labonte. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Curry County, and I'm going to read a statement I wrote up for the League of Women Voters of Curry County based on our national position. We are a national organization. I will say briefly, I was one of the 3 county commissioners in 2005 when Commissioner Brown was having secret meetings. And to this day, I don't know what he was going to do because he refused to tell me. He thought I was going to stop whatever it was. My other comment, the third commissioner was Commissioner Marilyn Schaefer, and I can say one thing about Commissioner Marilyn Schaefer. If there was a buck to be found for this county, she would have done it. And she voted against whatever it was Ralph was going to do. So just so you know, and she knew, because she told me, oh, he wouldn't tell you because he was afraid to stop it, but she never would tell me either. So I was really in the dark, and I don't make decisions in the dark, which is one of the reasons I voted against it. So with that, I'll put on my hat as president of the League of Women Voters of Curry County. The League of Women Voters supports management of land as a finite resource, not as a commodity, since land ownership, whether public or private, carries responsibility for stewardship. Land use planning, the League supports land use planning that reflects conservation and wise management of its resources, identification and regulations of areas of critical concern such as fragile or historical lands where development could result in irreversible damage, such as shorelands of rivers, lakes, and streams, estuaries, and bays, rare or valuable ecosystems and geological formations, significant wildlife habitats, and unique scenic areas. The League supports acquisition of land for public use and review of environmental, social, and economic impacts of major public and private development. The League of Women Voters of Curry County appreciates that the county commissioners are taking time to review the uses of the Flores Lake property and listening to the concerns of the North County residents. We feel that the Flores Lake property is special to those residents, and therefore, as their representatives, the views of the majority of the North County residents should be respected. This area is surrounded by water and is a valuable ecosystem to wildlife. We hope the commissioners will make every effort to preserve it in its present state. Thank you, and I have copies for you.
I'll just send one for sure for.
Thank you, Lucy.
And I think one for sure for Carolyn, I would say. We can get additional copies later, but those.
I'm not sharing mine.
Okay, and
How's
then,
that?
okay, thank
That
you.
good?
Thank you.
Do you have any questions? Awesome. Thank you.
The next speaker was Joe, I'm not going to butcher the last name. Janowitz?
Yeah.
Did I get, was I close?
Pretty close.
Okay.
I've heard much worse. Hi, I'm Joe Janowitz, and I live here in Gold Beach on Hunter Creek Road. And I attended the public workshop in Langlois back in April. I'm a hiker, a kayaker, fisherman, and outdoorsman. And I strongly support the conservation and recreation option that was broadly supported at the community meetings in Langlois. The wetlands, scenic views, coho habitat, and world-class recreation opportunities make this land a quality potential addition to Curry County's recreation economic base. I think the best way to accomplish this would be the land swap with the state park system. Curry County could secure other more financially viable lands while at the same time preserving this valuable recreation resource. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker was Mary from Langlois.
Good morning, Commissioner Huxley and Gould and Boyce. Thank you for listening to our comments. I'm Mary Wall, and with my siblings, I'm a fourth-generation ranch owner in the Langlois area. To be brief, I was going to make just 5 comments and covered nearly everything I would have said. I agree with her outcome, and so I'll just make 2 of my 5 comments. The first is, on this issue, citizens have been as clear and united as on any issue I've heard in a long, long time, and the recommendation to you from nearly everyone has been not to develop or log it, but instead to conserve it. And my other point that I will make out of the 5 is that perhaps most importantly for the decision in front of you, the 500 acres are already supporting businesses and jobs in Curry County. They're contributing to small local businesses. They draw visitors to our area to spend money in Curry County. So thank you for considering these comments, and I urge you to support the citizens' recommendation, avoid logging and development of these 500 acres, and instead to support the conservation option. Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, the fourth speaker is Trudy, is it Spanner? Spanier. I should know by now, sorry.
Thank you, Commissioners, for hearing all of us out. Again, we had a meeting in Langlois attended by 150 people, and I'm sure there even would have been more here this morning. However, the first packet that went out erroneously said that there would be no public comment. So a lot of the people said, well, why bother to get the day off? And as you know, North Curry County, we're all working and struggling to pay our mortgages. So there would have been a lot more people here had they known that there was going to be more public comment. But with that said, we've been here and done that again and again and again. And I'm sure somewhere in those buried files, there are appraisals, there are timber cruises, there, as many times as this has been done, there has to be some sort of record. The last one where George Rhodes dug into all that septic, and that's still on Oregon Parks and Recreational's websites with all the maps and everything. The whole thing is on there. And he had to have gotten some sort of value before he was pursuing all that in secret meetings. Not just that instance, but Anne very well covered all of those times. We've already been here and done that. I would like to urge the county not to spend any more money on looking at development of this parcel. We just lost close to 200,000 acres of wildlife habitat. We need to preserve this piece in particular. It's magic over there. And there are bald eagles there. I know there's a golden eagle nest there somewhere, but we have not been able to find the nest. On our side of the lake, every year for the past 3 years, we've got one nest that has produced 2 eaglets every season. So we are blessed. Every day I walk out my front door, which is on that Boyce Cope Road, and I really appreciate the beauty, and I ask God to continue to let me live there. One of the things that I would beg you not to do is open any road access at all to that area. And that would saddle us as the citizens again with what they call an attractive nuisance. Anytime you have vehicle access, you have the people that are going to try to camp along that road as a free place to have these marginally homeless people traveling around in their little motorhomes or in their tents and looking for a place to park, to hide out. All this small criminal element seems to know that north of Port Orford, we don't have any law enforcement coverage. We've got them right there in our neighborhood. They go to the post office, they collect their mail at the post office general delivery, so no one knows where they are. Even the warrants that they have in Coos County, they're hiding out right down there. And they're I think it's Tuesday at the community church, they're picking up their free food. And that is where our Curry County sheriffs serve the warrants. You know, it's a known area that we have no law enforcement coverage. And when I got my concealed weapons permit a few months ago, I was told by the sheriffs that I wouldn't believe the increased number of people that are going for their concealed permits because we feel really vulnerable. Please just don't do anything that would add another attractive nuisance. I mean, you know, I hear in the middle of the night, my bedroom is on the side that is the Boise Cope County Road going to and from the park. And I hear all these RVs that are being turned away from the park because there's cones in there that they're already reserved. And they're coming in and out. There's such a potential to get that revenue. If you would look at doing a land swap with something by Pistol River or by Hubbard's or by any of those water sports areas, I mean, I have not looked to see what Oregon Parks already owns, but if we could get another county park at Pistol River or another county park somewhere where the windsurfers and the kiteboarders go, this is an industry that is growing. And there are a lot of people that have these $500,000 motorhomes that are pulling in and they want a place to stay, and we don't have room for them right now. You don't want to saturate one area, but Pistol River is renowned. They even hold an event there every year that brings a lot of money to Gold Beach. And if you could find something, if you could find something to trade along the highway that these motorhomes could get into, we could get a lot of revenue. Thanks.
Thank you. Fifth speaker is Bob Morrow.
Good morning. Thank you very much for hearing the comment and the presentation today. Bob Morrow from Langlois. The question came up of everybody in this room, how many are actually here because of the conservation easement or the conservation concept? Can you stand up, please, if you're for the concept of a land swap? This may save us a little time on public comment. Thank you very much. So you have to make a business decision right now. It's pretty much what we're talking about here. You have limited assets. You have this beautiful piece of property. It looks like a diamond. But what is value? Is the value turning it over quickly, or is it a long-term proposition? What is best for the long-term value of Curry County? I hope you take that position as you consider your options here. The short-term, selling it for perhaps waterfront property, you had a short-term value there. But the long-term value really is the conservation. The long-term value is in the economy of the recreation that supports Langlois, supports Port Orford. This is something that will be there in the future. If you look at a map of the United States at night, everywhere on the East Coast, it's nothing but lights. Everything to the south on the West Coast is nothing but lights. But if you look at that map of the United States and the lights at night, Curry County is the dark coast. Curry County has this unique, special thing. It's represented in the land that we have at Flores Lake. Trees that bring people from the East Coast, bring people from San Francisco up here to go kite surfing, to go agate hunting on the beach and what have you. There is the value that will serve the county in the long term. And the way you maintain that for the county, the way you create value for the local economy of Langlois is preserving that while you have the business opportunity to get land that the state has, perhaps forest land and powers, perhaps something on 101 that could become a campground like Trudy was speaking about. That preserving what we have is critical. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Sue. Is it F. Swift? Is it pronounced? Sweet, S-E-E, okay.
All of my questions and concerns have been answered.
Okay.
Thank you for your transparency and you and Ann for your service. And I agree with Ann.
Thank you. And thank Bob for his comments. The next speaker is Kevin McHugh.
Members of the Board of Commissioners and staff, I'm Kevin McHugh. I live in Port Orford in the urban growth boundary. I don't really have a lot to add to this. You've received written comments from me. I want to specify, I chair the county's Citizens Involvement Committee. I chair the Port Orford Planning Commission. I work on the county's Planning Commission. I'm not speaking on behalf of them. I'm only saying that because it puts me in more direct contact with the business community. Nowhere in Curry County is recreational tourism more important to the economy than up in the north part of the county. This Flores Lake area, the entire area, is the economic engine that keeps North County running after the steelhead have left, but before the summer tours begin. After the summer tourism ends and before the salmon come in, it's recreational opportunities up there that keep the economy churning. It's a long-term economic engine. I'd like to respectfully request that the county do proceed with exploring some kind of conservation of that area for the recreational opportunities and the economic benefits it provides. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Gary Garman.
Good morning, Commissioners. I would echo everything that Ann has said. I also think Carolyn and John have done a wonderful job of presenting the options, and I certainly don't begrudge you looking at every option. I would begrudge you if you made a wrong decision, but that's down the road. To address one of the issues that Commissioner Boyce brought, I will be able to send you some film of 2 brown bears crossing Flores Lake if you'd like.
I'd love to be wrong on that.
Oh, I'd be happy to prove it.
Brown bears.
Also, I did a preliminary survey of that property by walking it. If you saw the video or the pictures that Ann had, I'm the blurry guy in the blue. If you look at my right hand, I had a machete, and I frankly wish I'd had several of them. That is rough country. There were substantial indications that bears were in there. I think more importantly, there were certainly indications that sometime probably before any of us were born, somebody went in there and took the spruce out. There are spruce stumps throughout that area. So I think my guess being that the prime logging has already occurred there, long before our time. So anyway, I thank Ann and I thank you all for considering this.
Thank you. Next speaker is Chris Hawthorne.
Thank you, Commissioners, for allowing us, the public, to have some input on this, being so transparent in this hearing. I was a member of the County Real Property Task Force, and we unanimously did agree that the best thing for this property would be that it remains public. And our recommendation was to have you come into a dialogue with the state in hopes that there could be a beneficial swap that would financially benefit Curry County, as well as then preserve the property for the future generations of Curry County residents and visitors. Recreation and tourism is our future. in Curry County, and we're starting to see that in North County. I am a business owner in Port Orford, and I'm amazed at how many people, first-time visitors, are coming to Curry County, increasing every year. And their comments that they make over and over again is about our natural beauty. They're just blown away by the coastline and the areas that lead up to the coastline. My biggest concern is water quality in Curry County. And Flores Lake enjoys clean water. I used to have a place up at Lakeside in Coos County. Lakeside used to be the home of 3 salmon canneries because of the coho runs that would run through the 10-mile lakes. And I don't think there's much in the way of coho there anymore at all. And they did develop that lake, and now there's a huge green algae problem that Port Orford, or that Flores Lake enjoys not having. And I think that is a prevalent problem in the Northwest with a lot of lakes, and we really need to focus on keeping that from happening down here. Again, I just want to say that our long-term picture for Curry County is tourism and recreation, and I really appreciate that and hope that you would focus on that so that continues to grow in the future. Our businesses have been growing for the years that we've been doing that in Port Orford, and the reason is it's so beautiful here. And let's keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you. The last speaker slip here is from Ann Morgan.
I'll stand from here. I'm also from Gold Beach.
Could you please, you won't be picked up so that your remarks won't really be heard on the record.
Pass the mic.
Thank you for having us. I'm also from the Gold Beach area. I wanted to let you know that those of us in South County do support the North County folks. And selfishly, I have enjoyed the Flores Lake, New River, and Blacklock Point for over 30 years. And when my kids come back, that's one of the go-to places. And so I hope that we can continue. And I wanted to thank you for your transparency. It's amazing. It's happening that this is so transparent. It's a delight for the citizens here, and also for your cordialness today. I appreciate that so much. And thank you all who have already spoken in terms of conservation.
Thank you. Okay. Did anyone else, that didn't fill out a slip, want to make a comment? You want to just come on up, please? And identify yourself so we'll note it here.
My name is Linda Tarr, and I live in Port Orford in the urban growth boundary. And I do want to bring up one point that no one has brought up yet, and I am not an expert here. I don't really have the expertise to talk about this, but if there are cultural resources on this property under the federal NAGPR law, you would need to consult local tribal people and not disturb those cultural resources. That could be another barrier to any kind of development. That is another reason why recreation and conservation is the obvious answer to this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I add something to that?
Can you?
Yeah.
Then please. You want to identify yourself again?
I am Trudy Spanier. I also am on the real estate task force with Chris. Now, I just wanted to add to that, and I forgot to say this before, but we had a visitation out at the airport with the real estate task force, and Carolyn, you were there, right? And we had another participant in this visit whose name was Reg Pullen, and he is a historian and on staff right now with the Consolidated Tribes. Isn't that the name of them? The one as their archaeologist. And he also is a consultant with the Coquel, the Tallaway tribes. And there are 4 tribes that are interested in this area. And yes, there are many cultural resources in there, as this was a Quatoma summer camp. And a private citizen cannot see any of these maps. It's a secret maps, but the tribes do have them, and they try to keep it as private as possible so that no one goes in there and raids the cultural resources. Reg Pullen could be consulted. He's very interested. At the end of that visitation at the airport on the Curry County lands, I gave him a ride back to his truck, and he said he is very interested in preserving this for the grandchildren and for the future, and not having anything done in there. And they are just waiting to see what the county does. So yes, in answer to that, there are many cultural resources in that area besides the one that George Rhodes accidentally dug in, that are on the OPRD website. Thanks.
Thank you. See one more hand. You want to come up? And Lucy, identify yourself.
Lucy Labonte, and I'm going to speak as a private citizen right now because back in 2005, when I was looking into the feasibility of doing anything with that property, 2 things came to mind while people were speaking. I was on a council, the Resource Conservation and Development Council, with a fellow named Lyle Gardner. And Lyle was from North County originally, and he told me this wonderful historical story about when they tried to log, and they did log some of that property. They had to log it by barge. They could not get in to that property. And I don't know how long ago that was, but he was about 80 when I knew him, and I would say it was probably in the 1940s, 30s, 40s, or 50s when they did that logging. I only bring that up because somebody said they saw stumps there. That is probably the project. The other thing is, one of the questions was access back in 2005, and I talked to Roadmaster Dan Crumley about it, and he said, well, when Commissioner Terry Hanscom looked into it, and later Commissioner Lloyd Oles looked into it, he did go out and scope the area to figure out approximately how much it would cost to put a road in, and he said, Lucy, it would probably cost $1 million. So just so you know, that kind of historical information. And I believe that there was a survey on timber for Commissioner Lloyd Oles, and Jim Rogers probably would know because I think Jim Rogers might have done it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just need 2 or 3 minutes before noon here.
Okay. Are we okay? We have one more.
My name is Liza Carlson. I live on Denmark Lane. My family's land backs up to this county forest, as we were explained to it when we bought our land in the 1980s. There are bear. They're getting in my trash cans. There are deer.
I shall forever be remembered for that comment.
There are deer. My dog took off and chased one over. My neighbors, the Browns, are raising cattle. There are deer that graze with them as well.
I didn't say there was no deer. Well, excuse me. Okay.
There is a lot of live stock out there. There is also a lot of natural habitat that needs to be preserved. I don't know enough to know if it needs to be a county forest, county land. I personally prefer to have land closer protected by the people who live there. The people who are in Salem may never even see this area. And I know there's a lot of people here that want the state to take it. But I don't necessarily trust you guys either. but I trust the state less.
Understand, they're broke.
Well, I think we are too, but
Yes.
it's okay.
I was getting to that.
We're pretty close, yeah.
Okay.
Just one last thing, just a
That's
comment came up about using the county forest designation possibly as a way to get out of the revenue sharing issue. And another thing that came up that I think I sent you information about, Carolyn, was that there was also a provision for creating a county park that would also be a way to possibly avoid that. So that's just another detail. There's so many details in this puzzle. And so I really appreciate you two digging in and you commissioners really taking the time to look into this. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go with, again, we'll keep the same flow, Commissioner. So Commissioner Gold, do you have any?
Well, after listening to
Comments?
all of this, I'm thinking, what about a swap with the state for either a forest? I think that would probably be less expense on us
It's true.
to take care of things rather than a park. So, just my thoughts.
Okay. Any other comments or?
No, I appreciate all the comments from people that
Okay.
they're looking at long-term, and I would do the same.
Commissioner Boyce?
Thank you. We keep hearing the swap, and that seems like a logical thing to do, but the inventory of what the state has available is not a really impressive amount. Somebody mentioned Reg Pullen. He used to come to my lodge and record Native American history, which is pretty significant there. So he would be an excellent resource. I honestly had not thought of tribe involvement here. I think that has tremendous potential, along with the BLM, perhaps the Forest Service. The BLM has a lot of little isolated pieces of property in Curry County that really are also not very accessible, that collectively we might be able to do something like that. Again, the Nature Conservancy, I think having their involvement, as I stated earlier, would have some very good potential. One thing that does concern me, I'm hearing property owners, and maybe we can clarify this down the road, but I'm hearing property owners that want to keep it as it is, but I'm also hearing the recreational value. So I don't know how we can have one without the other. I'm not saying a big open it up sort of deal, but if you know, I employed people in the tourism business for years, 4 months, very good wages. Did not, though, sustain families. And so I believe we have to have a very balanced economy. And, you know, the irony here is that as we transition from natural resource-based economy to tourism, then we lose what we just lost in Brookings. Not to overstate that either, but that hit. And so where I'm going with this, and I didn't think of it till this morning, is the susceptible risk that county acreage is to fire. Yes, it's close to the coast. Okay. I'm sorry, I don't want to debate here. I just want to send out a little bit of warning that I think we all would be irresponsible to not be aware of, that every part of this county is susceptible to fire. And it may be 100 years. It may never happen. Just what I've learned in the last 2 months and through my life living here, that is just something, and if I'm wrong, I'd love to be wrong, but it is a little bit susceptible, and I think we need to include that in any kind of future plans and direction we go here. One other quick question, there's a little piece of property that's up by the mouth of New River. I wasn't familiar with that, or not enough, and it looks, we could discuss that later. We're kind of winding down on time here, and I want to give the other commissioners time, of course. Going back and looking at all the commissioners, I have no illusions that when I'm long gone that there's going to be things said about the positions I had, and as a board, you know, the policies that we set. I'm just going to ask that as we look forward, that maybe we not be too guilty of looking back, and I'm not seeing any great benefit there. And some of those folks, Peg Reagan is here. She worked very hard as a commissioner. Lucy Labonte, we need to involve those people and take advantage of the mistakes that they learned, some of them the hard way, which we all do. And so pulling the communities together, I didn't suggest that Brookings is opposed to a swap with the state, for example, but I think that a lot of them are not informed, and we need to take Ann's presentation and educate them. I feel much more educated today, and I've spent a little bit of time in this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
while we can't make a decision today, I think we can give an indication of direction to John Hitt and Carolyn Johnson. So I'm not going to speak for, but anyone but myself, and hopefully, we'll get a similar response. But I would certainly encourage and be of consensus to give you, direction to pursue. I think that what came across from almost everyone in the room, from the presentation to the public comments, and we have a list of, if there's a question, as far as who said what, or, we have an interpretation, we have the time that everyone spoke, they've identified themselves, you have emails, so it would be easy to communicate back, but I would encourage consensus from the board to do that, or to give you that basically direction, not a formal decision, but just, do we have that from Commissioner Gold?
Certainly.
And Commissioner Boyce?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we have direction to do that.
Could I ask for a little bit of clarity?
Yes.
So am I hearing that the board is interested in providing direction on the conservation option?
Correct.
The recreation.
That's the
Okay,
message
thank you.
certainly that I understood, yes.
I'd like to look more into the carbon credits. That, of course, would be conservation, and look more into the swapping with the forest land, possibly.
Okay. With just state parks or other agencies as well? Because
I say
Commissioner Boyce.
open it up.
Okay, Commissioner Boyce brought that up.
Yes, if there's any way we could collectively recruit them in their own best interest as well, I think it would give us some additional credibility and even some additional hope.
Did your direction want to include connecting with the tribes?
BLM, Nature Conservancy.
I would
Tribes
say
as
yes,
well?
because that again is was a
That was a concern, yeah.
a valid point that came up,
Okay.
correct.
And the pieces of the recommendation in our report included money for some things. I think we need to come back to you at another meeting in that regard. But I think the piece about beginning the discussions with the other agencies and the carbon credits and the tribes, we could, I'm comfortable, John, that
Okay.
we
I am as well.
could
So we're
begin in that
clear
direction.
on that.
Right. If I may,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just to add, we're not going to be able, these discussions and this type of analysis that you've directed us to pursue takes some time. So we're probably not going to be able to bring anything more definitive back to you, and we don't want to bring something half-baked.
I purposely didn't set a time.
Right, and I
because
appreciate
think
that.
would be-
So just FYI for the public, I don't know a firm date now. I'm going to guess probably more like in November.
But there's still,
yeah.
there's enough interface, I think, that communication would
Absolutely.
not be a,
Keep the lines of
An
communication open, yes.
would you please come up? It's not a bear comment, is it?
No, it's not.
Yeah.
No bears.
I'm going to close with a bear, I'm going to close with
Hello.
a bear comment.
I just want to say my name's Teresa Bird, and just a clarification for your recommendations. I think state parks was mentioned because people feel confident that could be a conservation option, but if you're looking into talking about land swaps with other agencies, I think maybe to keep the conservation aspect in mind as perhaps BLM or other agencies might not be a conservation focus as state parks is. Thank you.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, but I think conservation was a key word throughout the comments.
I'm just going to follow up on what Teresa was saying, is we have in that vicinity, wasn't mentioned the New River area of ACEC area of critical environmental concern, which is another wonderful public lands area at the border of Curry County where there's a visitor center. It's a little bit hard to access, but you can access the beach there. But ACECs, this is a problem with federal government. There's currently legislation before Congress that would open these to logging. So it's tricky to figure out who, as citizens, we can trust to take care of our place. So so just put that out there too. So hopefully whatever you do could try to keep that in mind for the future, long term.
Thank you.
Could I make one more comment? Speaking of long-term, I just wanted to provide a little bit of a correction. Ann had a good presentation about the history on this, and one of the very last items was in 2016, the board reviewed the Real Property Task Force recommendations, and one of the things the board did at that time, and that included Commissioner Huxley, yourself, Commissioner Susan Brown, Commissioner David Brock Smith, is when they heard the community talk about the kind of last minute idea for a swap on a golf course for the Flores Lake area, the board at that time was very clear that they were not going to take an action in that regard, and they wanted staff to go back and connect with the community. Mm-hmm. And that was the impetus ultimately, and it took a long time. About a year later, we had our April meeting, community meeting. So there's a genesis there that I just want to make sure is in the record, that Commissioner Huxley, you and your prior board were also really dialed into the idea of pulling the community into this discussion. So
thank you.
Thanks.
Now, to close on a bear comment, I live in Harbor on Pelican Bay Drive, not that far up the hill, and we have black bear. And that bear stands on this block wall 2 or 3 times now, right next to where I have to go to get my car, which I don't get until the bear decides to let me. So there, Commissioner. Anyway, with that said, we will, did you have a comment?
You can tell if the bears are not there or not, depending on which car you drive to work that day.
Yeah, but and you can tell, you know.
Not about bears.
Okay,
honest.
no bears.
Just one last final point of clarification, and I'm going to show my bias here. The lady, and I apologize, I don't recall your name, from Denmark Lane. And here's my bias. In my entire professional career, I've always worked at the local government level, city or county. So one of the things I would like to explore at least a little bit more is the possibility option of us developing it, making it a community forest / recreation area. And obviously I wouldn't start that process now by any means, but just what that process, a little more information about what that process might look like. And again, members of the public, I mean, you're more than welcome to talk to myself or Carolyn about that. Again, we're not going to be bringing anything back until November. But yeah, just to add that piece. Okay.
I was glad you asked that question. It sounds too like we're not going to rule it out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that said, it is 12:07. We will, let me see, we're going to recess the workshop for lunch. We'll come back at 1
And you can set it later if you wish, Mr.
Okay, how
Chairman.
about 1:10? How about we come back at 1:10? Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
Anybody got any pliers? Do you need pliers too?
No, all you have to do is make a little loop, put it on your thing.
Okay, so we're back on. It's 1:10 p.m., Wednesday, September 27th, 2017. We had a workshop this morning, took a recess for lunch, and have now returned. This is agenda item 6, Curry County fiscal year 2018-19 to 18-19. Okay. Okay, 18-19. Revenue.
I believe that's correct.
Discussion.
Yeah.
Okay. Revenue recommendations of Citizens Budget Advisory Committee, Interim County Administrator John Hitt. So, John,
Yes,
I question. Okay, but you're right, not the fiscal year that we're in, but the next year.
That is correct,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. And I have to apologize to you. I neglected to bring to your attention when the budget was adopted that Part 6B, she was not able to get those completed in time. So I do want to have a discussion with you about those, but I'm not prepared today.
Okay.
Part 6B, the property tax revenue projections.
Okay, so.
So
not
I do
ready.
have some real rough ballpark estimates, but I really
Okay.
would prefer to refine those before bringing them forward. So when talking about budget preparation, obviously always, even in the best of times, always a challenge. Probably for administrative staff, it's the biggest challenge, and of course for the elected officials that have to make the budget committee, elected officials have to make the final decisions. Also, probably their biggest decision of any usual or typical fiscal or calendar year. And the hardest part of that is anticipating revenues. Expenses, you've got an existing track record of expenses. Usually you have a pretty good idea by the time you start to put together a proposed budget of where perhaps you can save some money, where you know or anticipate you might have to spend a little bit more. So the expense part, even though that's still very hard, is usually not the hardest part. The hardest part is estimating or anticipating accurately revenues. And of course, the two big errors are you overproject and you end up at some point during the fiscal year with less money than you thought you were going to have, and a very bad situation. Underprojecting revenues is not as serious, but still a problem, because if it's significant at all, you end up not being able to do certain services or perform certain functions that would have been beneficial or important, and that you might have been able to if we had more accurately estimated the revenues. So one of the things that I had brought to my attention was the what's called the citizen. I don't have, here it is.
Consumption tax.
Yeah, the Curry
County Citizens Budget Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, yes. And so they, the entire document is fairly thick here, where they look at a variety of things, including staffing, including perhaps consolidating departments, a variety of things that I will be looking at very closely, particularly on the expense side of ledger. Where can we have perhaps reap some savings without significantly negatively impacting services to the public. But one of the things they also recommended, and that's the purpose of just, again, wanting to start a discussion today, is under recommended for the Board of Commissioners review. The Curry County Board of Commissioners should consider appointing a special committee to review what type of ballot measures should be filed or what type of long-term revenue should be sought to support the county general fund and road fund using a 20-year funding methodology. And of course, there's lots of ways the county can tune revenues, one of which, for example, is planning fees. Right now, so far this year, our planning fees are coming in a bit higher than originally projected. That's the good news. Hopefully, as county building activity proceeds to hopefully pick up and improve, particularly from the very bad years of 08 and 09, that we can anticipate more revenues from building and planning fees. However, we could adjust those fees potentially. Obviously, you all would have to approve that and potentially have more revenue collection. So that's just simply one area of many areas where revenues could potentially be considered, and only at this point considered, discussed for adjustment. Another is, as your budget advisory committee said, do you as a Board of Commissioners want to consider bringing to the attention of our citizens one or more ballot measures that would adjust taxes? One, I guess, and I wasn't here at the time, failed fairly recently, was the transient occupancy tax. Commissioner Boyce has talked about it, and we got actually a little memo on that. A consumption tax, similar to what City of Ashland has, a tax only on beverages and food consumed in public institutions, restaurants and bars and that type of thing. Another is, I was just looking up today, the state of Oregon does allow for the potential for a local gas tax option. obviously, there's also public safety levies that are imposed. My home county, Lynn County, we actually have two, and I'm not recommending them, don't misunderstand me, I'm just commenting, has two public safety levies that were approved by the voters, and they both go back to the voters every, I think it's 5 years. And since I've lived in Lynn County for almost 20 years, they've been reconfirmed, reapproved every time. So again, just one of the many options that I think the Budget Advisory Board was asking is, do we want to have a committee, a commission, some form of soliciting public input, but also input of those that are expert in the field, whether it be tourism-related businesses, particularly obviously if we're talking about a transient occupancy tax, for example, and only for example, we'd want to hear from the hoteliers. If we're talking about consumption tax, for example, we'd want to hear from people in the running restaurants and bars and pubs. So there's a variety of public input we might want to solicit, or expert witness or input we might want to solicit, depending on if that's a program or a pathway that you as a Board of Commissioners want to pursue. So that's kind of my introduction to the, I gave myself 20 minutes. I didn't think I would take 20 minutes, but, and I don't think we will probably need an hour here for our whole discussion, but I did want to at least start the discussion. So as I begin to sit down and work on revenues, I will have an idea if this is something that you, as a Board of Commissioners, want to countenance at all, or have some folks give you some input on it, as the Citizen Advisory Committee recommended, or whether it's like, no, your preference is let's look at our current revenue structures, both as far as property taxes, as far as all the other possible tax options, as well as things like planning department revenues, fees and charges, those types of things. And if that's your desire to go in that direction, then, and we certainly don't need a decision. Obviously, you can't make a decision today. And I don't need a decision on that anytime soon, but the sooner I have some input there as to what options, if any, you as the Board of Commissioners are willing to countenance, then the sooner I can begin to put that side of the budget together as accurately as possible.
Thank you. Still, I guess, open for comments. We'll just continue in the same order today. We'll flip it the next meeting. Commissioner Gold?
I was thinking in terms of property tax. Generally speaking, every time there's a new tax, it's the property tax or property owners that are hit.
Right.
I've also been talking to a number of individuals about a possible consumption tax, but something that's not going to hit everybody. If you had, say, tax on non-necessary items like bars, restaurants, that sort of thing, these are things that people don't have to do, so they wouldn't be taxed necessarily. And I don't know how Ashland does their consumption tax, but that would be interesting to look at.
And that would certainly be something a committee or staff could bring back to you, more detailed.
Yeah, and I'm
information.
looking at how much does it take as far as time and so forth for this to be, what are the logistics? So sometimes going through these things, it takes a whole lot of bookkeeping time and that sort of thing. So I don't know, that needs to be looked at before we decide on anything. If we decide on anything. I'm done.
Any other? Okay. Commissioner Boyce?
Can you give the time frame again, which I hadn't thought of, and you mentioned in the last few days, just the getting it on the ballot before the voters and kind of that schedule Administrator hit?
Well, the next two elections that would be possibilities are, obviously, we're way too late for November, but would be March and May. And I don't have the exact dates. I don't think the state has set the exact dates, but roughly mid-March, mid-May. So to get something certified and ready for the ballot would probably be at least, there's state limits in there, and I think it's 75 days, but we would want to be ahead of that. So we're probably looking at you making a decision probably 90 days ahead of either those two dates. From a county staff perspective, we would prefer to know whether something might pass or not in March rather than May, because May is pretty late in the game. But either one would work. So if it's March, something would need to probably come back to you as a Board of Commissioners not later than early January.
Well, I have some other information, of course, if I may. I've been promoting a consumption tax. There's a reason I call it consumption tax, because that's what I've been advised. It does hit everybody, at least the plan prospectively that I see, or proposal. And I brought it before the board in April, I think, definitely twice, and then again, and it was voted down to have a consumption tax advisory committee, just a committee. The people that were willing to serve on that committee, I communicated to you folks, and that was 3 former commissioners, Rhodes, Itzen, and Bill Waddle, excuse me. And then Gary Milliman was more than willing. Then I had 2 lay people that I don't want to say their name now because I'm not sure if they still are interested, because there has been a little bit of a time sequence here. At any rate, none of those 7 people were in support of a sales tax. They were just willing to simply put their time in on doing the analysis and the evaluation, and I was a bit energized by that. They did offer some pros and cons that were valuable. And I also did some work with Paul Warner, the Oregon Legislative Office, that he did on pro bono free, and how that could be a positive thing for Curry County. And so it got voted down again in June, just to have the advisory committee. And so we've known for a long time we have a revenue problem. I'm still quite puzzled why it was voted down those 2 times, but I hope that very soon we can have a 3rd vote on this, emphasizing again, an advisory committee, because that committee may very well come back and say, no, not for Curry County. The thing I want to offer, and the reason I think there's a little bit of urgency here, if we did decide to go this route, the way the spending is going at the state level right now, and interesting, you highlighted, and I've seen this around the Capitol and the different legislative sessions, they tend to overestimate the revenue, and then they set their budgets according to that. And it becomes a big food fight up there, and it's a little discouraging at times. Of course, but I think you're going to see we will see the day when Oregon will have a sales tax. If, in fact, we have a tax approved by the voter, if that's the route we decide to go, in Curry County, we will be able to come in under the state umbrella. If not, and the state does a sales tax, which I have some real apprehension on, then we will lose that window. We will lose that opportunity. I'm with Commissioner Gold. The property tax thing, you heard people earlier today say they don't trust us, okay? The spending, despite that we don't have a spending problem here, we've gone through that process. Many good boards, I think, before our time. But the point is, property tax, I don't think is the way to go. This tax, as I understand it, and it can fit whatever custom process program we want to put for Curry County, will hit everybody. If somebody only has $10 and it's 2.5%, which is the figure that's being kicked around by the State Revenue Office, then that's all they have to pay. There'd be caps on like a $1,000 limit if somebody's going to buy a used car or something, so it doesn't hit our local car dealers too bad. It would require, as you said, just a lot of discussion and a lot of evaluation. I think that committee is still willing to work for us and make a proposal one way or the other. And the other thing that I've said in the past, and I think my board members are aware of this, is that you mentioned Ashland, Jackson County, Curry County, because of Highway 101 and I-5, because California is paying 10%, slightly under 10% as a sales tax, it still figures to pay for them to come across the border. So Ashland benefits considerably, so does Medford, so does Gold Beach. And so they would basically just have, okay, I can pay 9.5 in Delaware County, Humboldt County, or I can go to Curry County and pay 2% or 2.5%, whatever it is. So I don't have a lot of concern that that would negatively impact our businesses. There are systems out there that make it easy through the computer programming to collect, and I think you also, there's incentive there to offer them appreciation and not just dump it in their lap and make it a burden. So I think there's some positive aspects there to be sensitive to that. And then the last thing would be Tourism B, which is our visitors, which might possibly, according to the advice of the committee, should we pass this, be able to incorporate the whole transit lodging tax, promote tourism for Curry County as one destination, not the individual segregated areas in a competitive way. We need to compete with Newport and especially Lincoln County. My goodness, Humboldt County's got a tremendous visitor promotional program. So, you know, I think as a commissioner, my job is to try and pull the county together. This may be one way. It may not work. But you can take a certain amount, 2.5%, based on the recommendations that you have in your packets there, we would raise about $4.5 million. Then we would have a opportunity to go before the voters and spend it so incredibly wise, put a certain amount of that in tourism promotion that says thanks for what you're doing, the people you're employing, the people you draw to our area, becomes a positive aspect. And then I think that's it. Other than, I mean, I could talk longer, but I appreciate the 3 or 4 minutes here. And what I'm asking for as soon as possible is for the board a third time to consider appointing a consumption tax advisory committee. And I have people willing to serve, but of course that would be subject to the board's approval and other folks possibly. Thank you.
Do you have any other comments? Or?
No, I'm good.
Back, if I may, before we, you know, and we can agree to disagree on, we have a revenue problem, we don't have a spending problem. I am not of that opinion, and we could debate that till the end of time.
And just
what for?
Well, and just let me add, Mr. Chairman, I mean, obviously it's staff's job to make things work based on the policy decisions you guys decide, and we will do that.
On the, you referenced in here, the review and the recommendations of it would have helped, you know, I have mine here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and there were a lot of, you know, good things. But also, there were 2 different sets of recommendations. There were 2 different documents, and even to, you know, address that, because they made a point of that in their recommendations. Here's one we had time to look at, here's one we didn't have time to look at, but we have some suggestions there. So it's it's a short paragraph, but the first category is comprised of issues that the CBAC, which was the Citizens Budget Advisory Committee, did not have sufficient time or support to process. These are under the heading of recommended for CCBOC. That's Curry County Board of Commissioner review. The second category is recommended service reductions, consolidations. That's based on a combination of department interviews and budget analysis. I think the thought process, I'm not a fan of committees for a lot of reasons. Typically, I've seen them, the deck is stacked. You handpick who you want to be on a committee, so you're going to get the result that you want. That's why I'm much more supportive of the initiative process, where if you have the initiative and referendum process, you have the initiative process that lets, regardless of what the commissioners or the governing body would like or wouldn't like. It's just like this turnout that we had this morning when this room was full of people who were dedicated, they were engaged in something they believed in, not because the Board of Commissioners had a committee, to come up with whatever. It was an initiative process. That's, in a very real sense, what that was. It was a citizens' initiative to come here and voice their strong, constructive opinions on something. Let me just finish my train here of thought. The initiative process, regardless of what committee the commissioners may or may not want, or what agenda they may or may not have, allows the citizens, and there's not only but about half the states, I think, in the union allow this. Not every state. Oregon is one of them that does. Still, there's been, okay, rumbling about the legislature at times wanting to take that right away, but that's a process that I would absolutely support because it takes about 1,000 to 1,300 people to get those votes and come and say, here, and you don't have a choice, which is good, because the people can rule that and say, here's the initiative that we want to put on the ballot for it. Again, we can go on committees. I served on one. It was don't confuse us with the facts. Our mind's made up, and here's what we expect.
I was just going to
Commissioner
say,
Gold.
if it comes from the ground up, from the citizens, the chances of something passing would be far greater than
Absolutely.
if a little committee here were put together or 3 commissioners decided to put it on the ballot.
It's the easy route to put something on, but the last, I don't have it here, but I did gather not long ago and went back through the commissioner journals. And the last, I think it was 7 or 9 over 10 years or 8 or 10 years of those not initiatives, but of those ballot measures, including the recent transit lodging tax, failed 100%. And I think that's why some have said, hey, we're slow. It took us a while to learn, but people didn't want this, and the people, we work to service the people.
Absolutely.
So those are my comments. Commissioner Boyce?
Yes, we definitely have a disagreement on what our jobs are. I think it's our job to do the hard work and, stacking the deck, as you said. I just said at the end of that presentation that certainly, subject to the board's approval, we could put people on there that would do the homework. And so, yeah, our job is to take it before the voters and not just dump it in their lap and say, you want it, you take it. We need deputies, we need other services, and so, yes, we definitely have a strong disagreement there.
But we can professionally agree to disagree.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'll put it back to Administrator Hitt.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand your point and your perspective, and I think it has a lot of merit. However, I would make the case that that hopefully, and I believe, to the extent I know the 3 of you, I believe you all 3 aren't people that would try to stack the deck. I don't believe, and that you would appoint citizens that would truly represent a cross-section of interest and orientations in the county. So from the staff perspective, I think we would be in support. I'm in support. I believe the majority of the staff would be in support of the Budget Advisory Committee recommendation to appoint a citizens committee. Now, the downside, of course, is, you don't know, I don't know, nobody knows exactly what they'd come up with. So it may be something that you as 2 out of 3 of you, or all 3 of you, might find not acceptable. Their recommendation or recommendations, plural possibly. But again, nothing can be put on the ballot other than from the initiative process without your approval. So I think and again, I'm not familiar with the history. I don't know the history like you do, Mr. Chairman, and I respect that. Respect it, and the rest of you as well, your history in the county that I don't share with you. But I would, and I made the observation yesterday to the staff, that in my experience, in working in 3 states, the 3 West Coast states, I've not seen, and here I'm talking really property taxes, but I've not seen property taxes this low any place else I've worked. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, actually, it's a good thing. I'm an advocate of low taxes. But I do think it does create the relatively small county assessment, and actually I'd even say, again, in my experience, it's a tiny share, a tiny assessment. Does make it difficult, and particularly over the long haul, not so much, just not necessarily now or next year or even the year after that, but over the long haul, unless, and obviously we all hope this, unless we can get some significant economic development going, new construction, new building going, it does mean that unless some of these other options are approved by the voters, and of course they may say no, as they have in the past, that unless some other options are approved by the voters, it does mean that we, for the foreseeable future at least, will always, have just a very minimal amount of money to operate a county government. And again, my experience for the size of our county, and Commissioner Boyce mentioned the sheriff patrol, we have a very tiny sheriff's department for the size of our county. And when I say size, I mean both the geography and the population base. So, and the sheriff, just as an example, is operating with substantially fewer deputies than the sheriff was 10 or so years ago. And maybe that's the way it has to be. And if that's the way it has to be, the sheriff and myself and all the other elected and appointed officials will have to adjust accordingly. And as I said earlier, it's certainly my job to make things work the best way possible, the most effective way possible, based on your decisions and your direction. And I'm absolutely committed to that, regardless of my personal opinion about whether we need more deputies, or we need more folks working in the assessor's office or wherever, or we need a new computer system, whatever else may be in my mind or the staff's mind. Again, our goal is to fulfill the direction and the decisions that the Board of Commissioners gives us, and we will do so, and we will do so cheerfully, and we will do so effectively.
Commissioner Boyce, you got the hand up first.
It was a tie, wasn't it?
No, you were about.
That's okay.
Split second. We aptly mentioned the small per thousand value tax rate that we have. The only thing I want to kind of I need the reminder too, but because of the 43, 44 taxing districts that we have in Curry County, the taxpayers, property-wise, still getting hit pretty hard. And the evidence of that is we don't even, for the general fund, as you know, we don't even get, 10% of the $60 million that we raise every year.
Yeah,
so it is, compared to other counties, may not be, it is a bargain. No two ways about it. And you see that, I talked to the Josephine County Commissioners because they're kind of weighing that continually also. But they have the same problems, only at a worse level than we do. I mean, I'm just going to keep beating the drum because I think that's our duty. We live just 10 miles from one of the worst prisons in the United States, and it's over that border. And I said it earlier, and I think it's like not being aware that the fire could have happened. I mean, we're sitting here, we're exposed. We can make some responsible, prudent steps, and I think we'll be far better off. I'm not just trying to say the sheriff automatically needs more deputies, but you just made a very good point. Comparatively, proportionately, compared to other counties this size in the state, and if you want to include Washington State, we have a small department, and we have a lot of area to cover. And I saw this when we had to do the evacuations from the Brookings EOC office. Man, they work 20-hour days. And if we hadn't had the help from the state police and the National Guard and the Brookings PD, all the above, which Brookings PD is not responsible for outside the Brookings city limits, but thank God they were there. And it was just a remarkable thing to watch. And yes, the sheriff's department is something that should be the best in the western United States, and that's the goal we have to have. We can't do that without additional funding. And the list goes on. So I just have to keep politely stating that. Thank you.
I think there's two things. One of the problems we have is not just the amount of property tax, but the way it's allocated. And once you get into the special districts, a lot of times what was allocated years ago, a percentage, was way more than adequate now. And I keep bringing up the library because they built a wonderful building down there in Brookings, and plus they have a big endowment fund and probably don't need that tax base that they did when they were in the process of building. So once you get into the special districts and you do this thing in perpetuity,
That's true.
a lot of times it gets out of whack. There's that. And my other point is this: if we were to appoint a committee, I would like to see people from different areas, like a hotelier, retail person.
I agree, totally.
Those folks that are directly involved, not just past commissioners. So that's my point.
If I may, and I agree with you, they are willing to serve, but they also spent considerable time on this back in, oh gosh, I want to say 2013, 14, around in there. So they're, as I've said before publicly, their expertise and background is invaluable for us. They do not have to be the only people. Yeah, it almost sounds a little negative, though, that we don't want them involved. I'm just a little, maybe that's not what you meant, but it sounded
No,
that
I
way.
said not just.
They're citizens that, okay, all right. They're good citizens.
I'm not saying they're not good citizens. I'm not, denigrating them in any way. I'm
Thank
just
you for that
saying
clarification.
It should be
I'll use them as an example. I think it was 2011, 12, because that was a committee I was on, and it was handpicked by the commissioners. And
you got picked?
I was picked. Yes, I was picked. I was on their list anyway. I was on a different list, but I was picked, yes.
Okay.
And it was Commissioner Itzen was one, Commissioner Rhodes was another, Commissioner Waddle was the third one, I believe, commissioner. And the individual commissioner that represented or interfaced with the volunteers that had volunteered to serve on this Citizens Advisory Committee in 2011. It was started in November and it ended very quickly in like early February 2012. And when we were in one of the meetings, the commissioner said they would have no involvement with the committee on it. And then we had a presentation by, this case it was Commissioner Itzen. I remember it well. It was in the one of the buildings that the fairgrounds is where it was held. And he went on for 20-25 minutes. This is the way it's going to be. You serve at the direction of the commissioners. And then later in that process, and there was about 20 of us, so there were a lot of hours dedicated. I mean, we met for days, a full day at a time for several days. And there was this push come the first, it was into January, but this push, it has to be done by this date. And I raised the question in the meetings. I said, why does it have to be done? Why does it have to, why can't we do it the right way and take a little longer? And the response from the individuals, and I think it was some representatives from Portland State University, because we were told by the commissioners that in order to get your decision on the ballot measure in time, it has to be done by now. And I said, wow, okay. That's the worst way to try and get anything done if you've already made your mind up. And I said, this is all on the record. This is documented. This isn't something that I grabbed out of the thin air to make up. To jump to the sheriff's deputies, in the last fiscal year, that would have been the 16-17 that ended last June 30th. There were 10, I think then that year it was funded by road funds, as I believe. I might be off a year, but I'm pretty sure that was the year it was funded by road funds. And we had approved, we had approved, I think it was 1.5 million or 1.55 million, and it was increased, and additional deputies were added because they had there was a revenue source for the deputies. When we came to the budget meetings and the proposed budget and the approved budget for the road deputies for this fiscal year, which is 2017-18, that number was decreased from 10 to 8. And the question was, well, why? Because they had, and regardless of the reason, well, the reason was that they were not able to fill the approved 10 positions. So then they went down to 8. And I don't know that 8 are filled now. Now, we can go on to why, what was the reason? And there's a pretty standard reason. They're underpaid here. They go elsewhere. They're trained, but I'm just saying is that clearly the available money for that fiscal year didn't result in filling with the road deputies that were approved in the budget. So there's more to it than just money, okay, in any particular budget year.
So,
Commissioner Boyce?
I feel like you just denigrated former Commissioner Itzen, and I've known him for years. Doesn't sound like his person at all. So I'm going to challenge you, Mr. Huxley, to provide documentation that would suggest that he basically pounded his fist on the table and says, by damn, this is the way it's going to be. Because in all the work I've done with him on this, well, you insinuated that it was going to be, yes, I apologize for that, but you insinuated that it was going to be his way or else. I think that's a direct quote. So why don't you provide that information for the board?
Quote, but
well, okay, but it would denigrated him, and that's how we lose.
Why don't you ask Commissioner Itzen?
Excuse me. Why don't you let me finish? I'm sorry.
I will.
We need these people on board under any capacity to work for this county and solve the problems, and we're going backwards. And I've made this point before. So when we go like we. Earlier today, go back and former commissioners and say, by dang, he or she did this, A, B, C, and D. What in the world do we gain? There's citizens that maybe didn't make the best mistakes, or the best decisions, in fact, made mistakes. So are we going to point a finger at them and just say, wow, maybe they should have been moved out of the county or something? It just sounds so negative and so counterproductive to what the tasks are before us. That's all I have for now.
Okay. I won't comment on, it doesn't warrant my comment. Did you have anything else, Commissioner Gold?
No.
Oh, no.
Administrator?
No, I don't, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay.
None here, thank you.
Any further comments then?
I'm happy to have public comment, absolutely, but it's not just my decision.
For you, yes. Oh, no, but please.
So
you have
do
to
we
come
need a
up and
consensus on that, Commissioner Gold?
I think our rules say consensus of the board at a
Thank you.
work session.
I'm fine.
Well, it didn't matter the last time.
Oh, God, here we go.
I presume there was.
So what's the point being formal this
I
time,
presume
County Council?
it was already addressed, I thought.
Thank you, Counselor.
You want to just identify yourself, please?
Trudy Spanier from Flores Lake.
Thank you.
Is it the commission that establishes parks and recreation fees and policies? Is it you three?
Well, ultimately, they're approved. The recommendation for park fees would come from the Parks Department. The recommendation for planning fees would come from the Planning Department, and so forth and so on. From the assessor's fees, it would come from the assessor's office. But because it's fees, they're a special, it's more formal than other types of subjects in that you can bring it before the board, I think, twice a year, typically. Not that you have to, but fees require a public notice, public hearing. It's a more formal meeting to talk about fees to the public that are set for the public.
Well, perhaps it's something I should ask Jay Trost about first.
What?
Well, I see, because I live across the street from the park, and we walk around there all the time just for exercise, I see a lot of, when you have instituted the reservation program, I see a lot of cones in these spaces, and they are reserved for someone, but then there's a lot of no-shows. And I'm wondering why those people are not charged like the hotels do.
They may, I don't know. You'd have to ask him for that. They may
I
have
don't know
a
either.
policy, for that in their fee structure. I'm just not
Because those
aware of it.
spaces sit empty for days.
yeah.
And yet I hear all these motorhomes coming in and out, and they want those spaces, but those spaces remain empty, and I'm kind of just wondering
He would be
why.
the one to ask that
Okay.
question. I don't
You
know.
ought to check with
Because I
don't
think
know.
that's additional revenue we're
Sure it is.
Don't
It
know.
kind of
Don't know
losing
the
out on.
answer. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Boyce? Oh, I think we had another, yes, please. You want to come on up and identify yourself, please?
Thank you, Commissioners. Luke Martinez, Pistol River. Thank you for public comment. Yeah, so my feelings for the county is that we do have a revenue problem in the terms of collecting revenue, and there's some public services that are lacking because of that, both education and public safety. Mr. Huxley, I can agree with you that committees can be painstakingly difficult at times. However, I feel that agreeing with Commissioner Boyce that as citizens to see that the county went through the process of having a committee and looking at the best alternatives for us would be a beneficial thing. I do agree that property taxes could be a sticky subject when it comes to the voters. I don't see that being, at least within my peers, seeing that as being a positive movement. However, I do see, especially in the last 5 years, the amount of visitors. I work in the tourism industry, and in the last 5 years.
Would you mind telling us about your business, Mr. Martinez, and your family, even, if you would, please?
No problem. Yeah, so I own a small rafting business. We actually operate on the wild and scenic Chetco River. And so in the last, in the last 5 years, we've been seeing more and more visitors. And in my talks with groups such as Travel Oregon and OCVA, the Oregon Coast Visitors Association, they're putting more and more emphasis on our area, Curry County, right? So people are coming regardless. And I see this on a day-to-day basis, just driving into town or to Brookings every day, seeing people congregate on the beaches. And that's where you see it a lot. People are coming to the beaches. So people are going to come here regardless, we feel like. So why are we not emphasizing taxing some revenue off of that? I know you were talking about the transient lodging tax. That's something that I know that 75% of has to go to tourism, and I'm pretty sure I'm correct on that, and that 25% goes back to the municipality or the county. If the county could do something to change that, because I don't feel that, I feel that we're getting adequate money for tourism. You know, we're getting people. It's our services that are going towards that need help, public safety. So that's where if we could change that somehow and have that amount go into the general fund, just 100% or whatever, let's take the 75% and give 25% to tourism. Flip that if that could be possible. As far as a what you were calling it's not a sales tax, but consumption tax. I like that. Why? Because it's broad. It's affecting everybody that's coming through, including the citizens. So, and there's a lot to go for that. What I don't want to see is our county collecting revenue and then losing out on state funding, especially in education. If we're going to allocate money towards education, then that money should go in. We should also be allocating that the general fund comes from the state. Right now, and quote me if I'm not correct, but our school budget is operating over $1 million under than what we were 10 years ago. We're about the same student body, but we're under $1 million what we're operating.
At Gold Beach?
This is in the Central Curry School District, yes.
Okay.
And we're about we're about 100 students down from 10 years ago, and that fluctuates. 100 students, that fluctuates. But again, my peer group, sometimes it's hard for people to stay here because of jobs and whatnot, but so that's always an ongoing issue. But if any work we can do to collect revenue from outside sources would be fantastic, and not taxing our local population, as in property taxes. Thank you very much.
Question?
Yeah.
I think you raised your hand first, Commissioner Gold.
Well, that's why I'm advocating for a consumption tax that would be on things like restaurants and so forth, where the tourists come in and use these facilities rather than having the local people be squeezed.
Right. I agree with these, and I think that the local residents will agree with that.
We could call it a luxury tax.
Well, that's a transit, that's the lodging tax.
Well, the lodging tax is...
That's a lot of the items that Commissioner Gold had just, some of them mentioned, like restaurants, hotels, things like that. That fell into the category of the transient lodging tax.
But the way that's the way that's set up now, though, I believe is the 75% thing has got to change.
And that's state law.
That's state law, and that's something
the
that
problem.
needs to
It's
change for our
pretty
county.
non-negotiable
Right.
to my knowledge, at the
But
county
that's
level.
just for hotels.
No, it was a whole, that's
but
where it
for
got
restaurants
really
and all
got
the other
confusing.
stuff?
There were a whole bunch of other
I didn't know
So,
that.
okay, so I understand, so
other
hotels only.
things. That's what was more confusing on other things that came up. And I know when not that I disagree, but what I
I need to
disagreed
be
with there, and
educated
what
on
some of the main lodging hotels, they weren't involved. All of a sudden, they read in the paper that there was going to be a transit lodging tax. And then we had the largest hotel owners in the county coming here saying,
And I remember that.
what are you people thinking,
But my understanding on the TLTs, and I'll just abbreviate it there, is that they're compensated for their time, and correct? So I don't, talking to some of people that I know that do own hotels, and I think that the people that you're referring to have now sold their lodge. And
well, they were one, the Snazics were one, correct. But there was another large one, I think, I don't know the name, but in the Gold Beach area too. But it was the wrong way to start, to not involve the people whose business it is.
Right. So, go ahead.
Thank you very much. And of course, I asked about your family because I know you serve on the school board, and you made a very good point, well, several, but one that hits a nerve with me is difficult to stay in a rural area like this and make a living and provide for your family. And so I come back to what our responsibility is. And what you saw just happen here is the door got open a little bit. Discussion started. Different opinions, a little dialogue, a little debate even. And I think, again, that's our responsibility. It would be hard for me not to substantially, even if it's somewhat adequate right now, as you suggested, and that may very well be, not do an additional, really precise tourism promotion in the competitive part of what I mentioned earlier with the other regions that we feel very strongly we can compete with and win for the recreational dollar, which, by the way, is shrinking, and it's becoming more to the affluent. So as we change and address that, we have some incredible opportunities there. So any kind of tax that I might at some point support would need for the shoulder seasons. I mean, yes, I was in the tourism business forever. 3 months was great, and then you had to make enough to get through the winter, or you couldn't get it done. Thank you, Luke. And then just one more thing that you mentioned that I picked up on. You simply mentioned economic development, and that is on our list, and I know that is part of your expertise, which I really appreciate, and it's got to happen. It's part of the whole formula for coming back on this county. I mean, you can say figuratively and literally burn Curry burn if we don't do our job. It is that simple to me. Maybe I'm mixed up, but that's what I believe. Thanks again, Mr. Martinez.
Any other
Well,
comments?
Yeah, just, Mr. Chairman, just, I want to, once we're done here, or before we leave or adjourned, just want to make sure whether you want staff to take any further action along these lines.
I'm sorry, what's the last-
Whether you want staff, the majority of the commissioners want staff to bring anything back to you at a future meeting regarding either appointing a special committee, commission, or other things you might want staff to report to you on regarding potential or actual anticipated county revenues for next fiscal year.
Well, Commissioner Gold, what did you, it was
I'd
the
like some-
makeup. I mean, I agree with the bright makeup. I absolutely oppose to handpicking who you want that's going to give you what you want.
Oh, jeez, what a slam. God, what
I thought I
what a
had the-
slap on my integrity.
I thought I had the floor, but maybe not.
Unbelievable.
Okay.
Well, oh, excuse me.
And I think
Well, what I'm
was-
suggesting is-
That's what Commissioner
We're
Gold, I
looking
thought,
at
said.
various entities that would be affected by a consumption tax and have representatives from those entities be part of a committee if we decide to put a committee together. But I'd also like some more information from, what is it, Ashland? that has
Ashland,
the-
and there's one other city, and I'll look that up, that has a similar tax. to
Just
Ashland.
see the logistics of
Right.
doing that and how the money is divided.
They beat to a different tune also. I know, I got a good,
It's
some
true.
good friends over there, and
Ashland is
they do.
Ashland.
And they admit it, they just have a different philosophy and different types of reasonings for taxes, but they've been incredibly successful
But
for
that
the people
hotel
that live
tax,
there.
I never knew that it also included other entities other than hotels.
Yeah,
so-
and I can't remember all, but I remember a lot of details.
And RV parks?
Oh, it
RV
was a
parks,
whole,
well, yeah,
whole bunch of different
it's
things.
anything
Yeah.
related to
Yeah.
temporary stays.
It was almost.
It doesn't really impact food you buy in a restaurant or a beer you buy at a pub. But it does, transient opportunity impact falls on RV parks, camping, even can fall on tent camping. It's kind of up to the local entity, obviously hotels, anything where people will come and stay for less than 30 days and then leave. And pretty much,
But we're not talking restaurants and.
I thought it was restaurants
and
too, but I
bars and
also,
stuff
if I
like
was
that.
wrong, I'm
Yeah,
then I'm
believe
wrong
so.
on it.
I'll double
But
check that, and
but
if
I
I'm
remember
wrong,
It was a
yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, there's a lot of
It wasn't
different
just.
Well, I'd like to be
yeah,
educated
yeah,
on
yeah.
that
And
before
I will
I,
double check that.
even get into it any further.
Just real quick, Julie Swift from the Finance Department. There were two separate issues. There was the transient lodging tax, which was strictly a bed tax.
Right.
It was your RV parks, it was your hotels. At one time, the county was discussing a sales tax, which there was a long laundry list of things that would not be included in that, and that was never put forth on a ballot. It was all in process, but it was never put forward. It was work that Jerry Herbage had done. So it was in process, and there were various things that, well, this will be excluded and that'll be excluded, but that never went forward.
But the most recent one was about
Transient
3
lodging
years or
tax,
so back.
When Commissioner Brown was here.
Correct.
And it failed. It was strictly a bed tax, though. It had nothing to do with the restaurants
Okay.
or the bars or anything like that. It was strictly a bed tax.
And that's a transient tax, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's what it's called.
transient lodging tax or transient occupancy tax.
Okay, so that's only hotels and camping
And
places,
RV
RV parks.
And they were
okay.
the ones that were not within the city limits.
Right.
Which is why JOTS was affected, which is why SNAZX were against it. Although they are in the city of Brookings.
They are
But
in the city of Brookings.
It would have affected the RV parks and any lodges that are outside of the city limits.
So question, why were they against it? What was their reasoning?
I don't know. Mr. Snazek said they didn't need the money. They didn't want the money. They didn't want to put an additional cost on their.
Because most of the time when you go to a motel, at least me, you just expect to pay a tax.
Right, and there's already the state one.
There's a state.
And there's already in the city, there's a city one.
The state one
There's
just
not
doubled too, as I
It did.
recall,
There's
it
not
just
one that the
doubled.
county has for things outside city limits.
Okay.
Commissioner Boyce, did you?
Yes, Mr. Huxley, I'm just amazed with your assertion that somebody would stack the deck. That's exactly what you did with the Budget Committee in 2016. And that compromises transparency, and transparency gives you a great political advantage. And so I'll rest my case on that. That was not a good decision. Carl King's a great citizen. That's beside the point. The second thing, yes, I would like to have the board come back with the chance to vote on this on the advisory, consumption tax advisory committee. Next meeting would be, I'd like to get it on the agenda if we could. That'd be my third attempt.
Well, I don't think we're ready to, put something on, not with what I'm hearing from, how it should be put together, how the committee should be put together. I mean, obviously, as a commissioner, you're welcome to put anything on, but,
He asked what approach you would like us to direct him and staff, and so I think with the time we go, I'm sorry,
Well,
please
just-
go ahead.
Yeah, excuse me, Commissioner, just may I make a suggestion that we
Absolutely.
could do this in a two-step process, in the sense that the first step could be, as per Commissioner Gold, take a look at the city of Ashland. I know there's one that at least used to, maybe they quit, used to have a consumption tax similar to Ashland. So we'll ferret out those if this is agreeable to the board and just report back. Here is the experience. Here's how the other city or cities did it. Here's the revenue they got from it, received. And then here are some of, and we'll do our best to get from those cities and those communities, do our best to get input that's both positive and negative, especially from the restaurant owners and the people.
whomever
Yeah,
affected
right.
from
Chambers of
different things.
Commerce and so on.
And what might make up a committee also.
Right. And that could be part of what we bring
How did
back.
they go about getting it passed
And that could be part of it as well.
and come up with the
And
recommendation?
The only thing I would request, if the commissioners are okay with that, Commissioner Boyce, is because the deadline for next meeting is 5 o'clock this afternoon, and I have to have my agenda totally prepared and by Friday, early Friday afternoon. So if you give me, well, I got a couple options.
I'll help.
I could
I'll be glad to help.
I could put it on the next workshop agenda, which you all agreed to for October 11th. I could do that. Or October 18th.
Whatever is a pleasure, board there. I think sooner the better with.
I agree.
I think do it right. Let's do it right.
Yeah, I just want to do a thorough, correct job.
For the sake of doing it again, doing something again.
Okay, so for me, the next workshop, October 11th, would give me adequate time.
That would give you just until next Wednesday.
Yeah, it's still tight, but I think I can do that. If not, I will ask you all for postponement to the 18th.
And what exactly are you looking at doing then?
So just
We're clear?
basically information as to what kind of tax do they have, or maybe just Ashland, but whoever else
Thank you.
has a consumption tax. What is the nature of that consumption tax? What is the percent? What are their collections? And then what, kind of a random man in the street, woman in the street, phone interview with the people that participate in the tax, both as customers, consumers, as well as the business owners. So just a random, it'll be.
And makeup of committees
That'll be a fun
also from
trip.
people.
Yeah,
that
fun
do-
trip. No, I won't go there. I'll be by phone. But
Did you tell me they have like 32 restaurants total in that little community?
something like that. I have a lot of restaurants in Ashland. I can get that research, I believe, to you by the 11th and be fairly comprehensive. And then I could also include possible, in the sense of broad categories of folks that, one hotel owner, one restaurant, whatever it may be, to help make up that committee. Because I think we're all agreed.
Maybe what was their process in getting it?
And the process of
That
how
would be
they
good.
were successful. Yes, and that can be included.
What is your, this is just a question, what is your perception or understanding of the difference between a consumption tax and a sales tax?
My perception, and again, this will be part of my research, so it could be an error, but my understanding is that a consumption tax is very limited as far as what it applies to, and applies to only certain consumables. And again, in my...
A lot of restrictions.
Yeah, a lot of restrictions.
Exemptions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In my understanding, it is normally only applied to things that are physically consumed on the spot of the business premises. Yeah.
I'm
Which is
learning.
mostly just food and beverage. But there may be some other things that would fall under that as well.
What about theater?
It could include theater, yeah, so that's
The
some
only
of the
reason
research.
I'm saying that is
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of things that are
Yep.
not
Yep.
necessities.
Right.
Okay. So are we in agreement there, commissioners?
Yes.
For the direction?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it is 2:11. We'll adjourn the workshop.
Thank you.